If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
26. Longing. They're in the reception room, and Irika is giving them a lesson. When Charles heard the word lesson, his eyebrows raised in curiosity. What happened? Ginny looked a bit embarrassed as she explained, there was a close call when a grenade exploded, nearly injuring Shizuke. Irika is giving them a post-battle analysis. Upon hearing that Shizuke wasn't hurt, Charles didn't say much more. In the anime, Irika taught lower-ranked ninjas in the academy. Even though he couldn't defeat the two of them, Irika was still a Chunin and their teacher. At that moment, Charles took out a notebook from his pocket and said, Ginny, this is th healing bath formula Cross gave me. Test it out to see if it works, and if it does, set up a room as the recovery area. After receiving the healing bath formula from Charles and briefly reviewing it, Ginny replied, no problem, I'll get it set up as soon as possible. Just then, Cross appeared with Wesley. It seemed they had already established a connection, as they recognized each other rather quickly. Charles, the mission to protect Wesley is now over. Thank you for your help, Cross said as he pulled out the key of Charles's Porsche Cayenne and handed it over. Wesley and I are heading back, so I'm returning your car key. Looking at Cross offering the car key, Charles quickly said, Cross, you can have the car. It'll be convenient for you to take your son home. Regarding the Porsche, which now had a distinct sewer rat smell, Charles had no interest in keeping it and handed it over to Cross without hesitation. Hearing Charles's words, Cross didn't refuse and bid his farewell before leaving. After all, a Porsche Cayenne was worth only a few tens of thousands of dollars, and neither of them attached much importance to it. Not long after Cross left, Charlie and his team finished cleaning up the room and also said their goodbyes to Cross and his group. Ginny, go get Irika and the others. We'll tidy up a bit and then head to the Continental Hotel tonight. Because they didn't know if the assassins might strike again in the early morning, Charles planned to take everyone to the Continental Hotel for the night. This would also give them a chance to resolve the bounty issue the next day. It wasn't about being afraid of an attack, it just didn't make sense to stay up all night for this when there is other solution. Soon, Ginny came back with Irika and the others. Good evening, Master Charles, the three of them greeted Charles as they came out. Seeing Shizuke before him, Charles recalled the previous Shizuke fragment and his current collection of 10 ninja summoning scrolls. He felt an impulse to draw rewards, but he suppressed it. After exchanging greetings, Charles instructed them, you three get ready. We'll be staying at the Continental Hotel tonight and handling the bounty situation tomorrow. After quickly grabbing a few changes of clothes, the group drove to the Continental Hotel. Along the way, Shizuke glanced at Ginny inside the car with a look of hesitation, but he ultimately didn't say anything. Without encountering any assassins on the road, they arrived safely at the Continental Hotel. As they entered the hotel, several assassins were sitting in the executive corridor. Seeing Charles and his group's arrival, their gazes held curiosity and greed. This combination of a woman, child, and an Asian made them seem like a group of vulnerable individuals. Even though they had heard that previous attempts had failed, they were still confident in themselves. Their eyes held an aggressive intention as they looked at the group, except when their gazes met Charles's. Then their pupils contracted. Charles's reputation still instilled fear in them. They couldn't kill him, but trading the lives of the others for a bounty seemed like a good idea. Charles didn't pay much attention to the gazes of the others. One reason was his belief in his own strength, and the other was his trust that these people would follow the rules of the Continental Hotel. Approaching the hotel reception desk, Charles Doyle took out 5 gold coins from his pocket and placed them on the counter, saying, "Please check us in for 5 adjacent rooms." At this moment, Ginny leaned gently toward Charles and spoke softly, "Charles, won't you consider 4 rooms?" Charles didn't respond to Ginny. Instead, he reiterated to the counter, 5 rooms. Seeing that Charles wasn't taking the bait, Ginny also found it uninteresting and remained silent. After receiving the room keys she led the way upstairs. Seeing Ginny return to her usual demeanor, Charles smiled silently, choosing not to comment. He picked up his room key and headed upstairs as well. Boring. Shizuke muttered sarcastically, then picked up a room key from the counter and went upstairs. Irika shrugged and said to Lee, "Let's go, Lee. We should go upstairs and rest too." Taking the room keys for the last 2 rooms, they went upstairs together. In his hotel room, Charles's first order of business was to take a shower. After all, he had spent time in a car with sewer rats and then engaged in a bout of bloodshed. He was full of blood and dust. After freshening up, Charles changed into his pajamas and was about to enter the system interface when the doorbell rang. "Secretary Jin, you really don't forget to think about me all the time," Charles quipped. Opening the door, he found it was not Ginny as he had thought, but Shizuke Uchiha. "What's the matter? Come in and tell me." Shizuke wasn't polite either, he walked straight into the room and found a chair to sit on. Charles glanced at the corridor, closed the door when he saw there was no one else, and then asked, "Shizuke, is there something you need from me?" Looking at the man before him, Shizuke bit his lip and said, "Lord Charles, can you resurrect my parents in this world?" Hearing Sasuke's words, Charles was taken aback for a moment. As he gazed at the young man, he suddenly realized that this version of Shizuke was just a child, a 12-year-old child, to be exact. Even considering the time he had spent in this world, he was still just a 13-year-old child. And he had experienced the massacre of his clan only a few years ago. Hearing Sasuke's words, Charles was moved. He stepped forward, ruffled Sasuke's hair, and then sighed, "Shizuke, I can't make any promises. Maybe I'll be able to bring your people to this world soon, or it might take a long time before I can bring them over." Shizuke was momentarily surprised by Charles's actions but didn't flinch. His eyes were filled with tears of hope. He missed his parents and his clan, except for his older brother, Itachi Uchiha. Hearing Charles's words, he immediately got up, knelt down in a formal Japanese style, and said, "Please, Lord Charles." After speaking, Shizuke got up and quickly left Charles's room. 27. Sharingan. Watching Shizuke Uchiha run out of the room, Charles Doyle thought to himself, "I mentioned clan members, not necessarily his parents. I didn't promise that." It's not that he wasn't clear in his words, he genuinely didn't know. He wasn't sure whether his recruited ninja characters included Fugaku Uchiha and Mikoto Uchiha. After all, these characters hadn't appeared in the game before he crossed over. On the other hand, there were several character cards for Shisui Uchiha and Itachi Uchiha. Putting aside these thoughts, Charles returned to his bed and laid down, once again immersing his consciousness in the system interface. He opened the mission hall and saw that the B-rank mission to protect Wesley had been completed. He clicked to claim the rewards. Ding! Received 2,000 reputation, 200,000 copper coins, and a common treasure chest. Opening the treasure chest, he received an additional 2,000 reputation, but this time, there were no ninja fragments. However, Charles was still quite satisfied with the 2,000 reputation. After all, reputation was valuable currency, especially for upgrading. Summoning Beast. With these tasks completed, Charles was ready to embark on his eagerly anticipated ninja recruitment. Rubbing his hands together in anticipation, he muttered, "Sage of Six Paths, please bless me with a powerful ninja. Ideally, I'd love to start with a B-rank ninja." Ninja recruitment, 10 consecutive draws, go. The whirlpool symbol of Ozushiagakure appeared before him, emitting a peculiar light. After a burst of radiance, the recruitment results appeared before Charles Doyle. Ding! Received C-rank ninja, ninja trainee Naruto Uzumaki fragment X2. Ding! Received C-rank ninja, Tenten fragment X2. Ding! Received C-rank ninja, Sakura Harino fragment X2. Ding! Received C-rank ninja, Shizun fragment X1. Ding! Received B-rank ninja, Hinata Hyuga fragment X2. Ding! Received C-rank ninja, Temari fragment X2. Ding! Received B-rank ninja, Hinata Hyuga fragment X2. Ding! Received C-rank ninja, Sharingan Shizuke Uchiha. Ding! Received A-rank ninja, Fugaku Uchiha fragment X4. Ding! Received C-rank ninja, Hinata Hyuga fragment X1. Looking at the subtitles that popped up on the screen, Charles celebrated his successful recruitment of the Sharingan Shizuke Uchiha. The image of Shizuke with the Sharingan that appeared was from the Chunin exams in the manga, with his attire and appearance. Unfortunately, the large C-rank ninja label was next to it. Opening the details of the ninja, Charles first checked the ninja skills. Sharingan Shizuke Uchiha, C-rank ninja. Skills: Fire Style, Great Fireball, Sharingan, Chidori. Especially in the skills section, Charles took a closer look at the Sharingan. It wasn't just a regular 1-tomo Sharingan, it was a 2-tomo Sharingan. As for the other two skills, they were the same as the Shizuke he had recruited before, and they were exactly the same. Sigh. Charles let out a sigh. He didn't know how to feel about his luck. Was it possible that his luck had been depleted when he crossed over, or was it that not even the Sage of Six Paths could bless him with a powerful recruit? Charles consoled himself, it definitely isn't my fault. It's probably that the Sage of Six Paths don't work here, he can't bless me in the Marvel world. Next time, I'll try looking for other deities, maybe they'll bless me. Finally, Charles comforted himself, getting a 2-tomo Sharingan is probably not a bad deal. At least it's better than getting a ninja-like from the ninja school. After claiming the reward, in the next moment, a surge of chakra generated within Charles, providing the same amount of chakra as that of a lower-ranked ninja. With 3 more opportunities to use Chidori, Charles nodded in satisfaction. Afterwards, looking at the other recruitment rewards, Charles sighed, it's like they want me to piece together Hinata Hyuga. They gave me 1 C-rank version and then just exploded with 2 rounds of B-rank ones, totaling 4 fragments. And there's even an A-rank, Fugaku Uchiha. This is amazing. It directly exploded and gave me 4 fragments. That's 1/10 done in an instant. Unfortunately, combining the fragments of these B/A rank ninjas seemed quite challenging. Charles didn't have high hopes, after all, the appearance of fragments was very random, and there were so many ninjas. The difficulty of combining B-rank and above ninjas was just too high. On the other hand, characters like Temari, Tenten, and Shizuan, these C-rank ninjas, might have the chance to be completed with the next 10 draws, if luck was on his side. Summing up the results of this recruitment, Charles realized that although he hadn't obtained any major gains in terms of ninjas, he did earn a lot of fragments. He had received a total of 18, which was equivalent to 18 single draws. At this point, Charles opened his ninja list, and it displayed 4 ninjas, Irika Umino, Rock Lee, Shizuke Uchiha, and Sharingan Shizuke Uchiha. Charles didn't want to keep 2 versions of Shizuke, so he decided to merge the cards. Cards of the same character can be merged. After merging, they retain the memories obtained from the specific version and expand their skills. For example, if you merge Ninja Academy Naruto with Genin Exam Naruto, the character's appearance will change to that of Genin Naruto, and both body and appearance will grow. Charles first retrieved the specific version of Shizuke Uchiha, the one without the Sharingan, and in the next moment, the Shizuke resting in the hotel room disappeared instantly. With both cards now available, Charles initiated the fusion process. At this point, a dialog box popped up on the system interface, confirm fusion. After fusion, the star-up requirements for the character would be the sum of the previous character's fragments. For example, 30 fragments of Shizuke Uchiha plus 30 fragments of Sharingan Shizuke Uchiha. Considering that he only had 3 team slots at the moment and that he didn't need both versions of Shizuke simultaneously, Charles Doyle chose fusion without hesitation. A burst of radiance flashed, signifying the successful fusion of the characters. Ding! Due to the same character skills, Fire Style, Great Fireball and Chidori have been strengthened. Clicking on the fused card, the ninja's name hadn't changed, it was still C-rank ninja Shizuke Uchiha. However, the skill slots had increased. Besides the higher star-up difficulty, Charles hadn't noticed any other changes. Returning to the team slot, he placed the newly fused Shizuke Uchiha there. Ding! Do you wish to place Shizuke Uchiha back in his original position or within 3 meters of Charles Doyle? Place in the original position. Ding! Placement successful. The Shizuke Uchiha who had disappeared for just a few seconds reappeared on his room. The Shizuke Uchiha who had previously fallen asleep instantly sat up. He surveyed his surroundings and then, the next moment, as Shizuke opened his eyes again, the 2-tomo Sharingan appeared in his eyes. Sensing the activation of the Sharingan, Shizuke murmured, "Thank you, Lord Charles." 28. Kill until they shiver in fear. When Shizuke Uchiha was initially brought into this world by Charles, he had been quite panicked. He couldn't activate his 2-tomo Sharingan for some reason. It wasn't just the 2-tomo, even a single tomo was unattainable, as if he had returned to the time before his Sharingan awakening. During this time, Charles had explained the reasons, but Shizuke couldn't get over it easily. For Uchiha clan members, losing the Sharingan after awakening, it was a torment that could drive them insane. It wasn't until Charles informed him that once he was brought back from different points in time, his Sharingan would recover through the fusion of memories. But he hadn't anticipated that, after asking Lord Charles for help today, his Sharingan would return. Perhaps Lord Charles's attempt to bring back his parents or clan members hadn't succeeded, but he had managed to bring back his Sharingan. However, the only thing that puzzled Sasuke was that he hadn't felt like he had gained any other memories. He only felt that his body had become stronger, and his chakra more abundant. Unable to understand, Sasuke didn't think about it further and just continued to rest. At this moment, Charles Doyle has no intention of resting. After exiting the system interface, he stood up and went to the bathroom mirror. Sharingan. In the next moment, a pair of two Tomo Sharingan appeared in Charles's eyes. Looking at his reflection in the mirror, Charles murmured, "Can I call myself Uchiha now?" After experiencing the abilities of the two Tomo Sharingan and posing for a while in front of the mirror, Charles closed the Sharingan. He knew the Sharingan he possessed is just a skill, not the actual Uchiha bloodline. Charles thought, skills are better. This way, I can experience all the Mangekyo Sharingan abilities of Kakashi, Itachi, Obito, and even Madara. These various Mangekyo Sharingan special abilities could all be gathered within him. Thinking about having so many Mangekyo abilities, Charles's lips involuntarily curved into a smile. After all, for a fan of Naruto, having the chance to personally experience so many Mangekyo abilities would surely bring a smile to anyone's face. After toying around for a while, Charles Doyle returned to his bed to rest. Luckily, he was in a hotel room, and he was the only one present. Otherwise, it would be hard for anyone to imagine that this man, currently afflicted with Chiunibyo disease, is the legendary assassin Charles Doyle. Next day, the morning sun shone into Charles's room. The first thing he did upon waking up was to say, "System, check-in." Ding! Check-in successful. You've received 5,000 copper coins. After getting up and freshening up, Charles joined Ginny and the others in the hotel's dining area for breakfast. "Charles, how do you plan to deal with the bounty issue?" Ginny asked curiously as she ate her breakfast. It wasn't just Ginny, Rock Lee, Sasuke Uchiha, and Irika Umino also paused their meals, looking at Charles Doyle. Though they weren't afraid of assassination themselves, they were curious to hear Charles's plan. If there was any way they could be of assistance, they were willing to lend a hand. Meeting their expectant gazes, Charles took a sip of milk before saying, "Kill. Kill until they shiver in fear, until they dare not take any more missions." Although Charles's tone wasn't fierce at all, a solemn and murderous aura emanated from him. The assassins who were having breakfast instantly stopped their actions, and the entire dining area fell silent. Seeing the hushed dining area, Ginny didn't mind and smiled at Charles. "I hope there won't be too many fools knocking on our doors. Otherwise, I'm afraid the assassins from the Continental Hotel won't be enough to take all the other contracts." Irika chimed in, "If there are too many contracts, they can come to our office. After all, we're in need of missions." For a qualified ninja, especially someone like Irika who was in charge of the office, more missions were always better. Arriving in this new world, Irika was interested in many novel things, which led to a significant consumption of his funds. Hearing Irika's words, Charles chuckled. "Don't worry, our missions will become more and more plentiful in the future." The assassins present in the dining area listened to the conversation between Charles and his group. Some had serious expressions, while others showed disdain. However, everyone present acknowledged Charles Doyle's strength. After finishing breakfast, Charles led the group to the mission hall of the Continental Hotel. At this moment, there weren't many people in the mission hall, even to the point of being sparse. Only a few staff members were present, and there were only a handful of assassins. After all, it was quite rare for assassins to show up in the early morning to check bounties. The group found a round table and sat down, looking at the huge electronic screen on the wall that displayed real-time scrolling updates of information. This was the Continental Hotel's free mission area. As long as one was a registered member of the Continental Hotel, they could take on missions listed there. One only needed to pay 1 gold coin, and anyone could post a bounty mission in the free area. However, the mission issuer needed to deposit the bounty amount into the designated account of the Continental Hotel. After completing the mission, the commission would be distributed by the Continental Hotel. The advantage was that even if the mission issuer died, the assassins who completed the task wouldn't have to worry about not receiving the reward. The assassins only needed to pay a 10% commission from the bounty. In addition to the free mission area, the Continental Hotel also had a bounty leaderboard that listed the top 10 individuals with the highest bounties. Unfortunately, Charles and his group's bounty had been divided among 5 people, otherwise, with the 10 million bounty, Charles would have easily secured the first position. As for the expulsion list, not a single person was on it. Until now, no one had managed to stay on the expulsion list for long, as deceased individuals didn't qualify to be listed. Looking at the expulsion list, Charles knew that John Wick's name would soon be on it, becoming the only person to get off the list alive. Observing the sparsely populated mission hall, Ginny couldn't help but ask, "Charles, why are we here?" "To wait for more people to arrive." Hearing Charles's answer, Ginny didn't ask further, and the 5 of them waited together. Soon, news about Charles Doyle's group appearing in the Continental Hotel's mission hall spread. Assassins who received the news began to gather towards the mission hall. Some came to watch the excitement, while others wanted to see how Charles would handle the situation. There were even some who considered coming to confirm Charles's whereabouts, intending to strike when Charles's group leaves the Continental Hotel. 29, 1 hour. Time passed second by second, and soon many assassins arrived in the hall. Although the assassins present were engaged in conversations, their peripheral vision never left Charles Doyle's table. Seeing that there were about enough people present, Charles stood up and walked towards the large screen displaying the bounty missions. As Charles Doyle stood up, all eyes were drawn to him. As he moved, the gazes of the people followed him. Ascending the steps and approaching the bounty screen, Charles pointed at the reward posted by Sloane using a shuriken and began to speak. "The Continental Hotel has gathered 80% of New York's assassins. I wonder how many people are here in the mission hall today. I know that many of you came for this bounty mission." Charles paused for a moment and then continued in a loud voice, "I, Charles Doyle, am here to tell you today, to tell all the assassins in New York, that this is a provocation from Sloane. Last night, the Assassin Brotherhood was eradicated by my hands." At this moment, Charles's gaze swept across the people present. Some assassins who met his gaze immediately took off their hats and placed them over their chests as a sign of respect. Those without hats placed their right hands over their left chests, showing respect to Charles Doyle. This was the treatment that a legendary assassin deserved. However, there were also some people whose gazes wavered under Charles's gaze, avoiding his eyes. They didn't know what the Assassin Brotherhood was, but they harbored fantasies of making a name for themselves and stepping on the bodies of Charles and his companions to claim the bounty. After surveying the crowd, Charles continued, "The existence of this bounty is still a provocation against me. I respect the rules of the Continental Hotel and won't ask for the bounty to be removed. But I want to tell you all, to tell everyone interested in this bounty. In 1 hour, I will leave the Continental Hotel. I'll be waiting for those who want the bounty at the 3-way intersection outside the hotel. I, Charles, will show no mercy, and I won't hold back. Anyone who dares to make a move against me will not survive. But this is your only chance. Before 6 p.m., all assassins can act. I'll only target those who make a move. After dusk, anyone who dares to target me and the employees of Charles' agency, whether it's your faction behind you or your family, will face destruction." Charles's voice was powerful and resolute, especially when he said the last 3 words. His entire body emitted a killing intent that pervaded the mission hall. Seeing Charles Doyle speaking before the bounty mission, Ginny looked at him with admiration. This man was too manly, too charismatic. She really liked him. Charles saw that the many assassins present had grasped his intention and understood that they should meet in an hour. He then stepped down and returned to his seat. After Charles Doyle returned to his seat, the mission hall resumed its normal buzz. Many assassins took out their phones and sent messages. Some assassins were afraid that messages might not convey everything, so they directly made phone calls. They wanted to spread Charles Doyle's words. Especially the news that Charles Doyle had wiped out the Assassin Brotherhood was the most critical information being spread. Charles Doyle, back with his companions, glanced at the infatuated Ginny and said, "Later, we'll wait together at the 3-way intersection outside the Continental Hotel. If anyone makes a move, kill them." He then looked at the 3 ninjas and spoke to Ginny, "I'm not worried about those 3, but you. Make sure to put on a bulletproof vest, and bring enough bullets. I don't want anything happening to you." Charles was somewhat helpless about the Assassin Brotherhood members not wearing bulletproof vests. Although they were skilled marksmen, in a real fight, stray bullets weren't considerate. Given Ginny's abilities, there was still some danger. Ginny patted her leather jacket and said, custom made by the Continental Hotel, bulletproof version. Examining Ginny's bulletproof jacket, Charles pondered for a moment and continued, Irika, later you three will form a defensive formation to protect Ginny. For Charles, this demonstration of power had to be a resounding success, with no room for failure. He also couldn't allow any casualties among his team. He aimed to resolve this matter flawlessly. Hearing Charles's instructions, Irika, Rock Lee, and Uchiha Suzuki all agreed and assured Charles that they had it under control. Looking at the bustling crowd of assassins in the hall, Charles took out his phone, dialed Winston's number, and made the call. Winston, I need the Continental Hotel to provide a service. Seal off the area within a 500-meter radius from the three-way intersection outside the hotel for 6 hours. No one other than assassins should be allowed to pass through. Anyone appearing outside the hotel later would be Charles's enemy. When the time came, he would charge forward and eliminate them. Winston, who was on the top floor of the hotel at the moment, pondered for a moment before speaking. Charles, from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m., these 6 hours, the Continental Hotel can provide you with a sealing service. But it will require 10 gold coins. Upon hearing the price of 10 gold coins, Charles had no objections and agreed to Winston's terms. Just as Charles hung up the phone, a man approached. It was none other than John Wick. Charles, are you sure you don't need my help? 6 hours isn't a short period of time. It's even enough for assassins from outside New York State to fly in. Evidently, John had also heard the news and rushed over immediately. He wanted to assist the man before him, not only to reclaim the Blood Oath medallion but also to repay the debt of saving his life. John, believe me, I can handle this on my own. Charles declined John's offer. For Charles, this matter was not only about establishing dominance but also about showcasing his strength and adding chips to his bargaining position for future endeavors. Seeing Charles's determination, John didn't argue further but also didn't leave the Continental Hotel. He wanted to stay here, partly to witness the outcome and partly to be ready for immediate rescue in case Charles encountered trouble. Time ticked away, second by second. Soon, the hour was nearly over. At this moment, Charles, accompanied by Ginny and 4 others, walked towards the outside of the Continental Hotel. Inside the hotel, many assassins watched as this group left. As Charles stepped out of the hotel gate and looked at the bustling street, he muttered, there really are a lot of foolish people out there. Upon reaching the street across from the hotel, Charles glanced at his watch. There was 1 minute left. Prepare for battle. As the clock's hand approached 12 o'clock, in the next moment. Sharingan, activate. 30, do you want to dance too? Charles dashed towards the nearest group of people. He's here. Kill him! Shouted an assassin who was armed with a knife. A ninja blade appeared in Charles's hand, and he struck out, cutting down one assassin after another. Meanwhile, several assassins in the distance began firing their guns. Bang! 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 Bullets whizzed through the air, but Charles's Sharingan rapidly rotated in his eyes, allowing him to dodge the incoming bullets with ease. With a leap, he avoided the gunfire and swiftly delivered a flying kick to a nearby gunman. Boom! The African-American assassin with the gun was sent flying, crashing into a distant trash bin. He continued to fly for more than 10 meters before finally coming to a stop, lifeless. Charles turned around and charged towards another nearby assassin, beheading him before he could react. A massive head flew into the air, blood spraying everywhere. On the other side, Ginny wasn't idle either. She pulled out her specialized handguns from her backpack, dual-wielding them to initiate a merciless harvest. She aimed and fired at assassins in the distance, each bullet taking a life. Suzuki activated his 2-tomo Sharingan, protecting Ginny from all sides. He used shuriken to deflect the bullets that came their way. If it weren't for Charles's instructions not to use ninjutsu, Suzuki would have activated Chidori and gone on a frenzy of decapitation. As for anyone who managed to get close, they couldn't withstand the assault of Rock Lee's fists and feet. Every move he made was a fatal one. Suddenly, a hand grenade was tossed towards Charles. However, before the grenade could get close, a shuriken was thrown, knocking the grenade back to its origin. Boom! The grenade exploded, sending shrapnel flying. The surrounding assassins were caught in the blast. Several assassins wounded by the shrapnel fell to the ground, one of them shouting in fear, "Devil, he's a devil." It was Charles's Crimson Sharingan and his swift killing spree that left these few men utterly terrified. More shuriken flew out, finishing off those who were wounded, instantly quieting the scene. In just a minute, the area outside the Continental Hotel was in shambles. Shops and houses along the street were destroyed, and the ground was littered with dozens of corpses. Blood flowed, staining the black asphalt road with dark red. Inside the Continental Hotel, the numerous assassins stared at this scene in shock, immobilized. Someone who had been munching on an apple didn't even realize when the apple fell from his hand. A tall Russian assassin muttered with a wide-open mouth, "Is this the strength of a legendary assassin?" He was amazed by Charles's crimson Sharingan and his effortless massacre, leaving him in awe. John Wick, who had been ready to rush in to assist, listened and felt bitter in his heart. "Although I've retired, I was once known as the legendary assassin. But I don't have this kind of strength. No wonder he could annihilate the Assassin Brotherhood. No wonder he didn't need my help." At this moment, the assassins who had initially contemplated stepping out felt lucky that they hadn't crossed the Continental Hotel's threshold. They realized that Charles's strength was formidable, and his few subordinates were not to be trifled with either. Especially after witnessing Ginny's exceptional gunplay, some seasoned assassins secretly speculated whether Charles had eradicated the Assassin Brotherhood in a fit of rage because of her. This signature marksmanship was a skill known only to the Assassin Brotherhood. Soon, outside the Continental Hotel, aside from Charles's group, there was no one left alive. At this point, 500 meters away, assassins were still arriving. But as soon as they stepped within the perimeter, a shuriken suddenly flew out, piercing through their necks. They died inside the sealed area. Some assassins who hadn't yet entered the sealed area glanced at the dead man before them, then at the bloody scene within. Without looking back, they turned and left. At the three-way intersection outside the hotel, an eerie silence prevailed. Charles walked up to Ginny and the others, asking, "Everything all right?" Ginny looked at the spotless man before her and chuckled, "Charles, you're too powerful. We barely had to do anything, and all the enemies were wiped out. I haven't even finished a single magazine of bullets." As she spoke, Ginny raised her dual handguns. Seeing Ginny was fine, Charles's worries were put to rest. As for the other three ninjas, they hadn't suffered any injuries either. The intensity of the battle was disappointingly low, it ended before they even had a chance to warm up. Looking at the vacant street, Ginny asked, "Charles, are we just going to stand here until evening?" After glancing at everyone and then at the direction of the Continental Hotel, Charles walked towards the hotel. As Charles approached, the many assassins standing at the hotel's entrance instinctively took a step back, nearly causing a commotion. They thought Charles was going to storm in. However, they soon remembered the rules of the Continental Hotel and calmed down. At the hotel entrance, Charles didn't go inside. Instead, he said, "John, bring out a set of tables, chairs, and stools for me. I'll wait outside to see if there are any stragglers who want to join the party. I'll be happy to send them to hell." John didn't respond immediately but looked towards Winston inside the hotel. Upon seeing John's gaze, Winston said, "Karen, bring Mr. Charles Doyle a set of tables and chairs, along with some fruits and pastries." Karen quickly left the service counter, accompanied by a few other staff members, to arrange the tables and chairs for Charles's group. They also brought fruits and pastries. However, the chaotic mess of bodies outside and the lingering smell of blood made it hard for anyone to have an appetite. After the hotel staff left, the group sat down, but the sight of the disarray outside and the smell of blood in the air dampened their appetite. Charles said, "Ginny, you take the left intersection. If anyone crosses the 500-meter blockade line, shoot them down." Ginny picked up her handgun and grinned, "Leave it to me." "No problem. Suzuki, you take the right intersection. 500 meters isn't an issue, right?" Suzuki placed a few shuriken on the table and maintained a cool expression. "Don't worry, Lord Charles. I won't let anyone make it to you alive." Charles then sat down, creating a makeshift table in the middle of the three-way intersection. Ginny, Suzuki, and Charles each took charge of one direction. They were ready to eliminate anyone who crossed the 500-meter blockade line. Meanwhile, Rock Lee, who hadn't been assigned a position, found a relatively clean spot and started practicing his physical techniques. 31. S.H.I.E.L.D. The evening arrived quickly. At the beginning, there were still some assassins who were lagging behind in receiving information or were overconfident in their own strength. They ventured into the blockade area to try and earn the bounty. However, as time went on, whether due to word spreading or the accumulation of bodies at the edge of the blockade area, no assassin dared to step inside anymore. Instead, there were quite a few assassins who approached the perimeter, observed the battlefield, and left, as if to verify the accuracy of the information. By the time it was 6 p.m., the designated time, no more assassins appeared. With the conclusion of the event, Charles Doyle's name once again resounded throughout the assassin world. Not only did he become renowned in the New York assassin circles, but his reputation also spread throughout the entire assassin community. This event was marked as the Charles Incident. After this event, the Continental Hotel in New York revoked the membership of nearly 100 assassins. However, these members weren't removed due to being expelled from the mainland but because they had all perished. The legendary assassin, Charles Doyle, gained the title of the #1 assassin in New York. Inside the Continental Hotel, Winston looked at the bounty information for Charles Doyle's group. He wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to his subordinate. Soon after, Charles and his companions' bounties were no longer displayed in the scrolling task information. However, the bounties were still in effect. Lowering the visibility of the bounties was within Winston's power, but cancelling them required the action of the issuer. No one else, not even Winston, the owner of the New York Continental Hotel, could violate this rule. As evening fell, Charles Doyle was having a conversation with Ginny in a room inside the Continental Hotel. "Ginny, we need to arrange for the office's renovation as soon as possible. We can't afford to be closed for too long. Also, check with our neighbors next door to see if they're interested in selling. I'm planning to expand our indoor training facility. As for the current training area, we can convert it into a recovery room." Listening to Charles's plans, Ginny thought for a moment before speaking. "Boss, have you considered building the training facility in the suburbs? It would be much more cost-effective." Charles, perplexed, asked, "Ginny, are we short on money?" "Boss, we still have $20 million in the company's account, including the $6 million we received just the day before yesterday. If we acquire the property next door, the cost will be much higher. If you go to the suburbs, you could use the same amount of money to buy an estate and a large piece of land." As a capable secretary, Ginny naturally offered reasonable suggestions. After considering for a moment, Charles felt that separating the office and training facility too far wasn't necessary. He replied, "For now, let's proceed with purchasing the property next door. As for the suburbs, it's not a consideration at the moment. Ginny, I also have a batch of gold and jewelry from the last time we obtained them from Vigo. I'll hand them over to you, and you can decide what to do with them." Upon hearing Charles's instructions, Ginny sighed and said, "You're the boss, and your word is final. As for the sale of the gold and jewelry, I'll take care of it as soon as possible." As Ginny turned to leave the room, Charles reminded her, "Don't forget about John Wick's matter." "Understood, boss." Without turning back, Ginny, in her high heels, swayed out of Charles's room. The next day, the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division, S.H.I.E.L.D., main building. Phil Coulson, an agent whose hairline hadn't receded yet, was holding a tablet as he hurriedly made his way to the director's office. "Director, this is the latest report of unusual activity. Take a look." Nick Fury took the tablet that Phil Coulson handed over. The screen displayed a video, and he clicked to play it. In the video, an Asian teenager swiftly approached a woman holding a gun. With incredible speed, he delivered a punch that sent her flying, causing her to crash into a lamppost. After watching the video, Nick Fury's voice grew solemn. "When did this incident occur?" 3 days ago." Nick Fury played the video again, focusing on the speed of the man in the footage and how he sent someone flying with a punch. It wasn't just throwing someone, it was sending them flying, and there was a significant difference between the two. Especially in the video, the Asian teenager appeared to be quite young. "Coulson, have we obtained any information on the identity of the Asian teenager in the video?" Upon hearing Director Fury's question, Phil Coulson immediately replied, "Director, the teenager in the video is named Rock Lee. He's 13 years old and lives at 71 Forest Hills Avenue, Queens. The information on his identity was processed through the Continental Hotel. However, we couldn't find any information on him from birth until the age of 13. Listening to Coulson's report, Nick Fury stood up from his chair, rubbed his chin, and pondered for a moment before asking, "Is he an assassin?" Coulson nodded and continued, "According to the information we've gathered, Rock Lee's identity information was arranged by Charles Doyle through the Continental Hotel. And Charles Doyle is a registered member of the Continental Hotel, known as a legendary assassin in the assassin world. He has a firm which is one of his businesses and also serves as a platform for external tasks. Upon hearing that Charles Doyle was a legendary assassin, Nick Fury's expression was slightly disdainful. In his eyes, an assassin was nothing more than a rat in the gutter. Seeing the slightly dismissive look on the director's face, Coulson emphasized, "We've just received the latest news that Charles Doyle recently eradicated the Assassin Brotherhood 2 days ago." Upon hearing that the Assassin Brotherhood had been wiped out by Charles Doyle, Nick Fury was somewhat surprised. However, he still didn't attach much importance to it. What caught his interest was the 13-year-old Asian teenager. He saw potential in him. With proper grooming and training, he could become a valuable asset. Coulson, take the video to the intelligence department. Have them analyze the speed and strength of the young man in the footage. Once confirmed, proceed with gathering information and assessing the threat level. Lastly, I'm assigning you a task. If everything alright in terms of his age, attempt to make contact with the target. He's just a child, tagging along with an assassin. What's that about? If possible, consider bringing him to our academy. Let him attend school. A 13-year-old child should be in school, focusing on his education. Nick Fury's words sounded righteous. But whether it was a regular school or a special agent academy, he has already decided. After receiving the assignment, Coulson greeted Director Fury and then left the director's office. 32. Rules. 3 days had passed since the Charles incident. Charles Doyle stood in the lobby of his agency, gazing at the newly renovated and reopened establishment. He nodded in satisfaction. Within 3 days, the damaged furnishings had been repaired. The efficiency impressed him. "Boss, we've tested the formula for the healing bath, and there are no issues," Ginny reported as she approached Charles. Charles smiled and said, "Great. Since the healing bath is good to go, let's start setting up the recovery room." "Boss, the owner of the neighboring property isn't in New York at the moment. They'll only be back next week to discuss. It might take some time for the recovery room to be sorted out. However, we can temporarily modify one of the rooms. It can be used for recovery when someone is injured." Charles nodded and replied, "Okay, go ahead and arrange it. I'm going to the storage room." The storage room was located on the basement level. It was a vault created by Charles, containing some cash and other equipment. Upon entering the storage room, Charles waved his hand, and a box of gold and a box of jewelry that he had stashed away in his storage space appeared before him. Glancing at the firearms and ammunition hanging on the storage room wall, Charles shook his head. He hadn't used these things much in the past 3 years. After closing the storage room, he returned to the main floor. He cast a look at Umino Irika, who was sitting in the lobby, and walked over to him. "Hi Irika, where are Suzuki and Rock Lee?" Irika stood up respectfully upon seeing Charles and said, "Lord Charles, Rock Lee and Suzuki are sparring in the training room." Charles smiled and said, "Irika, as I've told you before, you don't need to be so formal. You're always so respectful. When Rock Lee and Suzuki are done, you can let them know that the healing bath has been tested and can be used for physical recovery." Irika was elated. "Lord Charles, that's fantastic news. While technology is advanced here, the recovery process is still too slow. We don't have medical ninjas here, so this healing bath is a great supplement." Just as Charles was about to say something else, Ginny rushed over and immediately spoke up, "Boss, there's news about John Wick, the one you asked me to keep an eye on. Exactly as you anticipated, his house was bombed by Santino D'Antonio." "Boss, how did you know in advance that John's house would be targeted?" Hearing Ginny's words about John Wick's house being bombed, Charles knew that once John completed the blood oath for Santino D'Antonio and then killed him at the Continental Hotel, violating the rules of the Continental Hotel, he would lose his membership and face expulsion. This meant he would have the chance to intervene in the high table's affairs. Charles smiled and said, "I had a hunch." Upon hearing Charles's casual response, Ginny rolled her eyes and asked, "Since you already knew about it, what's the plan now?" Charles grinned mysteriously. Wait for the right time." Seeing Charles playing coy, Ginny turned to leave. Charles spoke again, "Ginny, I've already stored the jewelry and gold in the vault below. Make sure to sell them off early." "Understood, boss." On the other side, John Wick arrived at the Continental Hotel with his newly adopted Staffordshire Bull Terrier. He headed straight for the hotel's service desk and approached Karen, saying, "I'd like to see the hotel manager." Karen looked at John Wick before him and greeted, "It's a pleasure to see you again so soon, Mr. Wick. Do you want me to inform Winston?" John glanced at his Staffordshire Bull Terrier and then back at Karen. "Yes, please. Thank you." He then turned to his Staffordshire Bull Terrier and commanded, "Sit." Seeing the obedient dog sit down, John Wick proceeded to head upstairs in the hotel. After John Wick left, Karen picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Sir, Mr. Wick is here." Hanging up the phone, Karen looked at the dog and sighed in relief, thinking, "I wonder who's the fool that's angered John Wick again." On the hotel's garden terrace, John Wick's first words to Winston were, "Where is he?" Winston didn't immediately address John Wick. Instead, he stood up and politely saw off his guest who had just here. Once the guest was gone, Winston turned his attention to the man before him and said, "Why are you here, John?" "He bombed my house." Winston's expression remained unchanged as he remarked, "You declined his blood oath. He merely bombed your house. Consider yourself lucky. What were you thinking? To give a blood oath to someone like Santino D'Antonio?" John Wick replied, "It was the only way for me to retire." Winston shook his head with a touch of exasperation and continued, "Do you consider this retirement? What do you think will happen? What are you expecting? Do you truly believe this day would never come? Don't forget, a few days ago, you just gave a blood oath medallion to Charles Doyle." Hearing Winston mention the blood oath medallion given to Charles Doyle, John Wick felt a bit frustrated. He turned away and didn't meet Winston's gaze. Seeing John's discomfort, Winston carried on, "Why did Santino D'Antonio approach you?" "I didn't ask. I refused him directly." Winston shook his head helplessly and said, "So, when Charles Doyle comes to you with a blood oath, are you also planning to respond in the same way?" "Guess so. You should know what the consequences would be if you played him." John Wick replied, "If Charles comes to me, I'll honor my blood oath promise. He saved my life." Hearing two different answers from John, Winston couldn't help but feel speechless. Refuse a blood oath request from Santino D'Antonio but be willing to assist a few days ago when Charles didn't ask you for anything. John Wick really shouldn't be so inconsistent in his actions. Winston extended two fingers and said in a very helpless tone, "John, the Continental Hotel has two rules that must be followed. The Continental doesn't allow bloodshed. No blood oaths are to be desecrated. While I could reduce your punishment to exile for now, if tradition is broken, the High Table won't spare you easily." John Wick looked at Winston, his voice low, "Do I have no other choice?" Winston's expression turned solemn, and he spoke each word distinctly. "Desecrate the oath, death. Kill an oath maker, death. Run away, death." After a brief pause, Winston continued, "John, these were the conditions you accepted. Only if you do as he says can you redeem yourself. Once you fulfill the blood oath, if you want to track him and burn his house, feel free. But until then..." John Wick said two words, "The rules." Winston smiled and said, "Exactly, follow the rules. Without rules, what distinguishes us from animals?" 33. Coulson pays a visit. Charles's office. At this moment, after giving some instructions to Amino Irika, Charles Doyle was getting ready to leave. Suddenly, the bell on the door rang, and a middle-aged man in a suit with a faint smile on his face entered the office. Both Charles and Irika shifted their gazes towards the newcomer. Seeing the man's face clearly, Charles's pupils slightly contracted, and he thought to himself, "Why would an agent from the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division come looking for me?" He remembered the massacre outside the Continental Hotel, which Winston had sealed off and cut off nearby surveillance footage on the same day. Moreover, given his demonstrated capabilities, it shouldn't warrant someone to come in person, especially not this man known as the nice guy, Phil Coulson, from S.H.I.E.L.D. Coulson walked all the way to the front desk of the office. After glancing at Charles and then at Irika, he finally approached Charles Doyle. He spoke slowly, "Mr. Charles Doyle, there are some matters that need to be discussed with you. I am Phil Coulson, an agent of the FBI. Here's my identification." As he spoke, Coulson took out an FBI identification card from his pocket and showed it to Charles. Seeing the FBI identification card, Charles couldn't help but feel speechless. It seemed that no matter what department they were from, they always used the FBI to conceal their identities. Charles remained composed, his expression calm. He said, "Mr. Agent from the FBI, may I ask what business you have with me?" Coulson looked at the lobby and smiled. "Mr. Charles Doyle, I don't think it would be appropriate to discuss matters here." Charles shrugged, indicating that he had no objection, and then said, "We have a meeting room. Let's go there." "Irika, bring me a glass of blackjack," Charles said as he looked towards Coulson. "And you, Agent, would you like something?" "Coffee, please." "Thank you." Following Charles, Coulson entered the conference room and sat down. Irika promptly brought the beverages and closed the room's door behind him as he left. Taking a sip of the whiskey in his glass, Charles looked at Coulson and said, "Go ahead and tell me what you need. Normally, your department wouldn't have any business with me." Coulson stirred the coffee in his cup with a small spoon and then spoke slowly, "Mr. Charles Doyle, I'd like to meet a child here named Rock Lee. May I?" Upon hearing Coulson mention Rock Lee's name, Charles knew that S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't here for him but rather for Lee. However, he didn't know the reason why Lee had drawn the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D. Looking at Coulson, Charles spoke calmly, "Mr. Coulson, Rock Lee is just a child. I'm not sure what could make an agent pay a visit for him. I am Rock Lee's guardian. You can communicate with me. I believe federal law wouldn't allow a conversation to happen between a child and an agent without involving their guardian." Hearing Charles allude to federal law, Coulson knew that the man before him wasn't just a simple hitman. "Mr. Charles, I'm sure I don't need to say who you are and what your background is. Rock Lee's identity has issues, and based on your circumstances, you can't become his guardian. Rock Lee is just a child. He shouldn't be involved in such a life. He needs a peaceful and healthy environment." Listening to Coulson's words, Charles didn't immediately respond. He picked up the glass of blackjack from the table, took a sip, and then stared at him. Seeing Charles remain silent, Coulson continued, "Mr. Charles, we've done some research on your background before coming here. You were adopted by someone yourself, and that's how you ended up on your current path. If, and I emphasize if, you hadn't met that couple back then, your life might not be what it is today. Now, Rock Lee is like you back then. I hope you can entrust him to us, to the government, to give him a healthy and happy environment to grow up in." Listening to Coulson's words, Charles couldn't help but find it amusing. S.H.I.E.L.D. has certainly done their homework thoroughly, even finding information about his adoption. They seem to want him to empathize and hand Rock Lee over to them for a better life. Charles looked at Coulson with a serious expression and said, "Why have you targeted Rock Lee? Is FBI supposed to deal with children's matters? Do you want Rock Lee to become an agent? An operative? Or something like you?" After Charles fired off 3 questions, Coulson lifted his coffee and took a sip. Then he continued, "Mr. Charles, we're just here to discuss matters with you for now. But you should understand that if the FBI wants to, your guardian status can be revoked at any time. This includes your agency here and even yourself. We have the authority and capability to shut down your agency and detain you. However, we're here to communicate at the moment, so please understand that I've come with good intentions. So, Mr. Charles Doyle, can you allow me to meet this child named Rock Lee now?" Although Coulson was a nice guy, it depended on whom he was dealing with. Given Charles's profession as an assassin, the fact that they didn't immediately arrest him was already a sign of his leniency. Hearing Coulson's words, Charles internally found it ironic. S.H.I.E.L.D. was still up to their usual antics. Charles's expression changed, and he slammed the table, his anger flaring. "Coulson, are you threatening me? Threatening a law-abiding citizen who pays their taxes on time? Whether you believe it or not, based on what you just said, I can sue you with the help of a lawyer." The smile on Coulson's face vanished as he looked deeply at Charles and said slowly, "Charles Doyle, you should know that I'm not joking." Looking at the man before him, Charles's anger still evident on his face, he said, "What can you achieve by meeting him? Rock Lee won't leave with you." Coulson lightly tapped his coffee cup with a spoon and slowly said, "Mr. Charles, that's a separate matter. Right now, I want to meet this child named Rock Lee. Is there a problem with that? Do I need to show you a subpoena and a search warrant?" Looking at Coulson before him, Charles couldn't help but realize that the image of the kind-hearted man from the movies didn't align with the reality. Movies were movies, and reality was reality. The question is, do you really have the capability to take Rock Lee away? As long as he wanted, he could recall Rock Lee to the system space from anywhere. He just needed to remove Rock Lee's character card from the battle slot. He was curious to see what Coulson, this seasoned agent, could get from Rock Lee. After all, he held the initiative all along. 34. Not an ordinary agency. Charles picked up a button from the table in the meeting room and pressed it. In just a few seconds, a knocking sound came from the meeting room's door. The next moment, Domino Irika walked in. "Irika, bring Rock Lee over here." Upon hearing Charles's command, Irika didn't say anything, turned around, and left the meeting room. Seeing Charles act this way, Coulson nodded in satisfaction. A hitman, even if he's a legendary one in New York, what can he do? After a few minutes, the door was knocked again, and Irika entered with Rock Lee. "Lord Charles, did you call for me?" Rock Lee walked in, with a smile on his face. He thought there was a new mission for him. Charles waved his hand and said, "Lee, come sit here. This gentleman has something to discuss with you." Seeing Irika leave, Coulson looked at Rock Lee's attire and curiously asked, "Rock Lee, do you admire Bruce Lee?" Hearing Coulson's words, Rock Lee was somewhat unsure. "Sir, who are you talking about?" Coulson gestured with his hands and said, "Bruce Lee, Kung Fu Master." Rock Lee still looked puzzled, but with certainty, he said, "Sir, I don't know who you're talking about." Hearing Rock Lee's response, Coulson uncertainly asked, "Then, this outfit of yours? It really resembles Bruce Lee, just the colors are a bit different." Rock Lee looked at the man before him and explained, "Sir, this outfit was a gift from my master. I like it and admire him a lot, but I don't know who you're referring to. Clearly, he's not my master." Hearing the mention of a master, a thought flashed through Coulson's mind. Puzzled, he asked, "Master? Charles?" Charles was watching Coulson's performance, not saying anything. He hadn't stopped Rock Lee from mentioning his master. After all, who knows, maybe Guy would actually come out one day. Rock Lee shook his head and clarified, "No, it's not Lord Charles. He's my own master. I wonder, sir, what business you have with me? Is there a task you want to entrust to me?" When Rock Lee mentioned a task, he appeared excited and full of youthful vigor. Upon hearing Rock Lee's mention of a task, Coulson glanced at Charles deeply, considering it unethical to involve a child in missions. Coulson's smile, which was friendly and comforting, appeared on his face again, and he said, "Rock Lee, would you like to return to school? To live the life of an ordinary child, carefree and focused on studies?" Rock Lee said helplessly, "Sir, I've already graduated, and it's been over a year since I graduated. I won't be returning to school for further studies." Coulson, who had been full of confidence, was taken aback by Rock Lee's words. He graduated? Seeing the 13-year-old Rock Lee, Coulson wanted to explain about the school he mentioned and the life he described. But before he could speak, Charles stood up and said, "Mr. Coulson, you can talk to Rock Lee. When you're done, I'll be waiting outside." After saying that, Charles left the meeting room. He didn't want to listen any further. Coulson's strategy wasn't wrong, but his target was off. Trying to convince a ninja to go back to school was futile. Even if he had a tailored approach, Coulson still couldn't sway Rock Lee. In fact, just a moment ago, Charles had considered letting Rock Lee go with Coulson, infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D's interior, and gather information for him not just about the Tesseract's location, but also about the energy cube derived from the Tesseract. He wanted to see if this thing could be recharged. But Rock Lee was just a child. What difference would it make even if he went? He would still have to enter S.H.I.E.L.D's academy for special agents. By the time he graduated and was qualified to handle those things, it would be too late. Charles also let go of this thought. When the time was ripe and his strength was sufficient, he would just snatch the Tesseract from Loki when he descends. Seeing Charles come out, Irika stood up and asked, "Lord Charles, is everything settled?" "Not yet. This person wants to talk to Rock Lee, and they're still chatting." Upon hearing that things weren't settled, Irika continued, "Lord Charles, since that man arrived, we've been under surveillance. I sensed the presence of danger. It seems more than one gun is aimed at our agency. I'm not sure if these people are here with this investigator or if they are bounty hunters. That's why I didn't apprehend them." Hearing Irika talk about surveillance and gunmen outside, Charles didn't pay much attention and said, "They're all here to protect this FBI agent. No need to worry." Hearing Charles's assurance, Erica didn't say anything either, and the two of them started chatting outside. About half an hour later, the door to the meeting room opened. At this moment, Coulson's face no longer held the friendly smile that had given people a good impression. He felt helpless. After talking for so long, he felt like he and Rock Lee were on different wavelengths. He didn't even gain much information, he only learned that the other had a master who was teaching him martial arts. The master wasn't around right now, but he would be in the future. Other than that, he didn't get much information. This kid was cautious, more like someone sent from a special academy rather than an ordinary person. Especially those hidden cameras and recording devices on him, he felt like the other party had discovered them. Because Rock Lee had been staring at certain spots for a long time, as if contemplating whether or not to bring them up. Coulson came to face Charles and said, "Rock Lee isn't willing to come with me, and he has his own idea. But I won't give up easily on this. Perhaps one day, I'll come back." In Coulson's mind, Rock Lee's master was Charles. Seeing Coulson hadn't given up, Charles said, "I told you before, Lee won't go with you. You should give up on this plan. Goodbye, Mr. Charles." Coulson didn't say much more and left Charles's agency. Once outside, Coulson went to his car. There wasn't only him in the car, Melinda May was also sitting inside. "May, the video and audio were transmitted in real time. What do you think about our conversation?" May took off her earpiece and said slowly, "This legendary hitman, Charles, doesn't care about us. Or rather, he doesn't care about the FBI. And he's very confident. He knows Rock Lee won't go with you. Also, this Charles agency isn't simple. That Asian guy named Erica realized we were surveilling. When you were talking, he walked out of the door and deliberately glanced at the direction our snipers were stationed. Moreover, he didn't show any panic. It's as if he's not concerned about being targeted." Hearing May's words, Coulson thought about Charles's attitude and his reactions when Coulson threatened him. Helplessly, he said, "Let's go back first and report to the director. Let's see how he wants to handle it. At the same time, leave a team to monitor the target." 35. Bounty. With Coulson's departure, Charles's agency returned to its usual calm. Charles didn't bother to deal with the surveillance personnel stationed outside. A bunch of pigs, they could stare all they want. Right now, he had other things to do and didn't want to stir up S.H.I.E.L.D's hornet's nest like this. But if they didn't know their place, Charles wouldn't mind sending them to hell to rest. Although Charles's agency had only been open for 3 days, they hadn't received any mission requests. Instead, the focus had been on the renovation, which had been ongoing for 6 days. During this time, Charles persisted in daily check-ins and finally obtained another ninja recruitment scroll. As for the other rewards, 3 times 5,000 copper coins and 2 times 200 reputation points. At this point, Charles had accumulated 7896 reputation points, 2.937 million copper coins, 1,058 gold coins, and a ninja recruitment scroll. Charles thought to himself, "When I reach 10,000 reputation point, I'll upgrade AODA. Speaking of which, I haven't summoned AODA for communication yet." After closing the system page, Charles was about to leave home and head to the agency when a message appeared on his phone. Sender's name unknown, public bounty, John Wick, $7 million. Seeing this message, Charles knew that John had killed Gianna D'Antonio, the head of the Camorra and a high table member. Any assassin registered at the Continental Hotel received this public bounty. Looking at the information on it, many assassins were left speechless. The legendary assassin, Charles Doyle, had also been the subject of a public bounty, but the reward had been a mere $2 million. Outside the Continental Hotel, it had been a scene of carnage with bodies and blood everywhere. This time, it was a much more serious public bounty contract, targeting the former legendary assassin, Night Devil. A public bounty and a public contract for assassination were 2 entirely different things. The former was just one of the many bounty tasks in the Continental Hotel's mission list, while the latter was directly sent to the hands of every assassin. Some of the newer assassins who didn't understand John's strength chose to abandon the task. After all, both were legendary assassins. Charles Doyle's reputation had been confirmed 3 days ago, and it was safe to assume that this former legend wouldn't be any weaker. On the other hand, some experienced assassins who had encountered John Wick's skills before became interested in this task. After all, although John was powerful, his abilities were within their scope. He could be wounded if shot and killed with a headshot. What's more, John Wick wasn't capable of slicing bullets in half. $7 million was enough for them to take the risk. Just as Charles was about to leave home, his phone rang again. "Boss, John Wick, whom you saved once before, is on the bounty list again, and it's a public contract for assassination. The reward has now reached $7 million. His value has increased really quickly. Boss, your investment in him might go to waste." Charles smiled and said, "Ginny, don't worry. My investment won't be in vain, and he won't die. Boss, as long as you're confident. I just wanted to remind you. Also, Carlos sent $4 million to us. He wanted me to tell you that he's managed to locate Sloane's cash, but he can't access the money in his bank accounts, including the other Brotherhood members. None of the funds in their bank accounts can be accessed." Hearing that more money had come in, Charles laughed and said, "Tell him I received his goodwill. If there are more tasks, remind him to contact Charles's agency." As for the money in the bank accounts, Charles didn't care. After all, money that couldn't be accessed was as good as non-existent. Hanging up the phone, Charles closed the door, got into his car, and drove to the Continental Hotel. "Mr. Charles Doyle, it's a pleasure to see you again." Karen greeted Charles respectfully. Charles smiled in response, "Karen, it's good to see you. Is the manager around?" Karen replied, "He's been here the whole time. Do you need me to inform him?" Charles chuckled, "That would be great." Karen picked up the phone and dialed, "Sir, Mr. Charles Doyle would like to visit you." "Okay." After hanging up, Karen said, "The manager is in the hotel dining area. You can find him there." Charles nodded and headed towards the dining area on the basement level. When he reached the dining area, he quickly spotted Winston, who was reading a newspaper. He walked over and sat down directly across from him. Winston folded the newspaper and placed it on the table after adjusting his glasses. He then slowly said, "Charles, did you come for John's matter?" Looking at the person in front of him, the master of the Continental Hotel in New York, Charles Doyle slowly spoke, "Santino D'Antonio is unethical. Right after John completed his blood oath, a bounty of $7 million was placed on him." Charles paused for a moment and continued, "The most important thing is that John Wick must not die. The blood oath badge I obtained must not go to waste." Seeing the earnest look on Charles's face, Winston thought to himself, the last sentence is what really matters. He then calmly said, "Issuing a bounty is a right held by every member of the Continental Hotel. Moreover, Santino D'Antonio has already inherited the family's position and become a member of the High Table. He has privileges and it's reasonable to issue a bounty for him. Most importantly, Gianna D'Antonio was a member of the High Table to begin with. If John kills a High Table member, he will inevitably face repercussions from the High Table. Anyone who kills a member of the High Table will face consequences, and even those who aid him." Charles smiled and said, "Winston, don't forget about Gianna D'Antonio's identity. She was just a member of the High Table, and a recent one at that. Even Santino D'Antonio, who has inherited the leadership of the Camorra, is just a High Table member. They're not part of the High Table's management, let alone one of the 13 seats. Besides, I don't believe that Santino, who took over the role of the murdered sister, can withstand John Wick's retaliation after angering him. After all, this guy burned John's house, the place where he and his loved one lived." Winston assessed Charles for a moment and curiously asked, "You know John quite well?" Charles smiled, "Winston, bet or no bet, Santino D'Antonio will definitely seek refuge at the Continental Hotel. It'll happen tomorrow night." Looking at the confident Charles Doyle, Winston rose from his seat and said, "I'm also full of confidence in John. Enjoy your time at the Continental Hotel, Mr. Charles." Watching Winston leave, Charles knew that he was going to reclaim the blood oath badge from Santino D'Antonio. At this moment, Charles Doyle thought to himself, it's coming, it's coming. The time is ripe. The High Table, which has stood for countless years, should also have a change of leadership. 36. Self-fabrication, most lethal. Triskelion Building. In the office of Nick Fury, Director of the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division, S.H.I.E.L.D., Phil Coulson was reporting on the mission. "Director, these are the psychological profiles and character assessments of both Charles Doyle and Rock Lee conducted by psychological experts. This is a report on Rock Lee's strength and speed from the Scientific Academy based on surveillance videos. These are the latest intelligence on Charles Doyle and the video captured by a miniature camera during our last conversation. This is the result of psychological experts, behavior analysts, lie detection experts, and other analysts evaluating the authenticity of Rock Lee's information in the video. Coulson placed the files he held on Nick Fury's desk one by one. At this point, Nick Fury reached out and picked up a document, then began reading it. He instructed, "Coulson, share your analysis." "Director, based on my interactions and the information obtained from Rock Lee, I don't recommend forcibly taking him away. According to the information provided by him and my analysis, this child named Rock Lee is likely not the kind of ordinary Asian teenager we previously speculated about, with no background. It's highly probable that he's someone cultivated by an organization with rich heritage." As he spoke, Coulson took out several photos from the documents. The pictures included not only Rock Lee but also Irika Umino and Uchiha Sasuke. Coulson pointed at the forehead protectors on Rock Lee's waist, as well as those on Irika Umino and Uchiha Sasuke's foreheads, and said, "We haven't found specific information about this symbol, but all three individuals wear the same emblem. Additionally, all three are of Asian descent. I boldly speculate that these three individuals most likely come from the same place. As for why they're following Charles Doyle and made him their guardian, we don't know." Hearing Coulson's analysis, Nick Fury nodded repeatedly. He then took out the information on Charles Doyle and read it carefully. From being adopted to becoming a registered assassin at the Continental Hotel, and then, at the age of 18, killing his foster parents and venturing alone in the Continental Hotel. Looking at the information, Irika Umino appeared beside him when Charles Doyle was 19 years old. At the age of 20, Uchiha Sasuke and the Assassin Brotherhood's Jinny also appeared beside him. At 21, the young Rock Lee appeared. Except for Jinny, the identity information of the other three was forged for them by Charles Doyle at the Continental Hotel. After closely examining Charles Doyle's information, Nick Fury spoke, 2 years ago, Charles was a gun-wielding assassin. However, since a guy named Irika Umino appeared, he quickly made a name for himself in the assassin world. He even became a ninja who uses cold weapons. Humph! Nick Fury snorted and said, "The Hand, a bunch of underground rats, can't stay put in Japan. They've secretly sneaked over here. No wonder they moved to wipe out the Assassin Brotherhood. This grudge has been going on for quite a while." Evidently, Nick Fury regarded everyone, including Charles Doyle, as members of the Hand. After all, there weren't many people worldwide who claimed to be ninjas and were exceptionally skilled, except for that group. For the backgrounds of Rock Lee and the others, he even considered them to be products cultivated by the Hand. The only thing that remained unknown was which finger of the hand they were under. "Coulson, there's no need to make contact with these people. Members of the Hand aren't worth recruiting. Store all this information and handle it with a security level of 4. Upon hearing the director's opinion, Coulson stepped forward and collected all the documents. He then asked, "Should we recall the personnel stationed there?" "Recall them. Our elites shouldn't be wasting their time there." The Continental Hotel. Charles sat with Jinny in the dining area, both of them smiling while eating steak. Meanwhile, Winston sat on the adjacent sofa, reading a newspaper. Jinny speared a small piece of meat with her fork, placed it in her mouth, and chewed slowly while her eyes remained on the man in front of her. After swallowing, Jinny picked up a napkin, gently dabbed her lips, and then spoke, "Charles, you seem to be in a good mood." Hearing Jinny's words, Charles thought to himself, "Today is truly a good day. He got 50 gold coins from signing in earlier, and there's another good show to come later. Of course, his mood is good." Charles smiled and said, "Today is a good day, and an interesting one at that." Before Jinny could respond, Charles turned to Winston sitting next to him and said, "Winston, today is going to be an interesting day. He will change some things that seem unchangeable. What do you say, Winston?" Winston shook the newspaper slightly, then calmly said, "Mr. Charles, I hope everything goes as you wish." Jinny shot Charles a reproachful look, annoyed that he was speaking in riddles again. Seeing Jinny's reaction, Charles chuckled, "Jinny, don't worry, there's a good show coming later." After explaining it to Jinny, Charles started devouring the steak on the table, not saying anything more. Jinny picked up her wine glass, took a sip, and then gazed at the man in front of her who had captured her interest. This man always had many secrets and often spoke in riddles, making it hard to figure him out. Moreover, his strength was like a black hole. Just when you thought you understood everything about him, you'd find out you had only scratched the surface. Thinking about this, Ginny couldn't help but cross her legs. About half an hour later, a voice came from upstairs, Winston. A slightly disheveled figure appeared before everyone. Winston, who was sitting on the sofa, looked up at the person upstairs and said, Mr. Antonio. Winston's tone was slightly mocking, it seems you had a great night. Glancing at Charles next to him, he said to the man approaching, I guess you're here to lay low. Ginny caught Winston's expression and silently communicated with Charles, is this what we're here for, fun? Charles didn't say anything, just nodded silently. Santino D'Antonio walked up to Winston, his hands in his pockets, and said, I want to revoke his membership status at the hotel. Immediately, right now. Winston looked at the anxious Santino calmly and said, from a procedural standpoint, Mr. Wick has not violated any rules. Seeing Winston's resistance, Santino D'Antonio immediately became angry and said, you should know that I'm now a member of the High Table. I have the authority to command you. 37. A turn of events. Winston took off his glasses and smiled, no, Mr. Antonio, you don't have the authority to command me. This realm belongs to me alone. Santino D'Antonio's face turned dark, displeased, he retorted, fine. Guard your realm, Winston. While you're still alive. Without hesitation, Winston retorted, and you guard your privileges. Santino D'Antonio, at this point, didn't look at Winston anymore. Instead, he turned and took a seat, called over a waiter, and ordered a steak. Meanwhile, Charles and Ginny watched the conversation between the two in silence. After Santino D'Antonio sat down, Ginny whispered, wasn't he the one who issued the bounty? Why does he look so embarrassed now? Just now, he wanted to revoke whose membership? John Wick. Charles's face was tinged with mockery as he spoke, there are always those who think that holding something gives them the right to do as they please. They burn down someone's house on one hand, and make them fulfill a promise on the other, and right after, they put a bounty on their head. So, sometimes blood oaths or promises must be entrusted to someone with morals and boundaries. Otherwise, who knows what unexpected twists might arise. Charles didn't hold back his voice, and his words resonated throughout the hall, making everyone clearly hear him. Many people looked at Santino D'Antonio with disdain in their eyes. Santino D'Antonio's face was embarrassed. Having fled all the way to the Continental Hotel, he was already in a sorry state. Now, after being taunted by Charles, he was even more furious. But he didn't dare to confront Charles. After all, someone like John Wick had left him in such a pathetic state. Now, facing an even more formidable opponent like Charles Doyle, he was afraid he would never leave the Continental Hotel in his lifetime. Coincidentally, at this moment, a waiter arrived carrying steak and wine, ending the awkward atmosphere. Taking advantage of dinner being served, Santino picked up his knife and fork and began cutting his steak, trying to disguise his embarrassment through his actions. On the other side, John Wick arrived outside the Continental Hotel, holding a handgun. Pushing open the hotel doors, John Wick entered with a visible aura of menace. He reached the front desk and said to Karen, I'm here to see Santino D'Antonio. Karen stared at John Wick, his aura filled with killing intent. He took a deep breath, swallowed his saliva, and replied, he's waiting for you in the lounge, sir. John Wick didn't linger and headed straight for the dining area on the lower floor. He arrived at the staircase and saw Santino D'Antonio enjoying his dinner and wine below. John's anger surged even higher as he descended the stairs. As the footsteps echoed near the staircase, Santino D'Antonio noticed John Wick approaching. Perhaps he believed that the earlier mocking from the crowd or his confidence in the Continental Hotel being an absolutely secure zone played a role, but Santino D'Antonio adjusted his suit, straightened his posture, and stared as John Wick approached. In the dining area, everyone, including Winston and Charles's group, noticed John Wick's presence, especially the gun in his hand, which stood out conspicuously. Santino D'Antonio looked at John Wick as he approached. He casually picked up his fork, skewered a piece of steak, dipped it in duck oil, and then chewed it slowly. He leaned back in his chair, gazing at John Wick while eating, and then he spoke, duck oil, it's an essential seasoning. Beside him, Winston attempted to halt John Wick. John. Santino D'Antonio provocatively said, John, have you seen the menu here? Feel free to choose. Winston saw the intense aura surrounding John Wick and realized that something was amiss. He quickly spoke, "John, let me explain." On the other hand, Charles and Ginny observed the performance of the two in silence. John Wick didn't pay attention to Winston's words. He simply continued to glare at him. Santino D'Antonio continued to taunt, "After spending time here, you always want to try something different." Between his words, Santino was subtly indicating to John that as Santino D'Antonio, he had taken residence in the Continental Hotel, and he wouldn't leave easily. He was saying, "You can't kill me." Winston's tone changed as he realized what was going on. He said in a low voice, "John, leave now." As if Santino D'Antonio felt his provocation wasn't severe enough, he continued to mock, "Yes, John. Get lost." Just as the word "get lost" left Santino's mouth, John Wick raised his hand and shot a bullet straight through Santino's head. It seemed that all of John Wick's accumulated anger was unleashed in that moment. Disregarding the rules of the Continental Hotel, he directly killed Santino D'Antonio within the hotel. Witnessing this, Charles thought, even in a safe zone, don't be reckless with your words. After all, some people might risk the consequences just to initiate a forced player versus player situation. At this moment, Ginny covered her mouth, looking at Charles in disbelief. Her eyes seemed to say, "Charles, your investment is a loss, a real loss." Winston was also shocked. John Wick had killed Santino D'Antonio right in front of everyone's eyes within the Continental Hotel. Looking at Santino D'Antonio, who was now completely dead, Winston's voice was solemn as he asked, "What have you done?" John Wick placed the handgun on a table in the hotel and coldly replied, "Putting an end to all of this." After speaking, John Wick turned and limped out of the Continental Hotel. As he passed by Charles Doyle, he paused for a moment and then clenched his right hand as if he were holding on to something. Once John Wick left, Ginny asked curiously, "Boss, what did you give him?" Charles put a finger to his lips, making a shushing gesture, and then said, "Ginny, it's time for us to return to the office. The world of assassins is changing again." At this point, Winston looked at Charles Doyle and asked, "Mr. Doyle, is this what you meant by change?" Charles shrugged and said with regret, "Isn't it, Winston?" Meanwhile, John Wick, having reached the hotel front desk, looked at Karen standing beside his beloved dog. He asked, "How's he doing?" Looking at John Wick before him, Karen replied with a hint of respect, "He's well behaved. It's nice to have him by your side." Without looking at Karen again, John Wick slightly bent down and said to his dog, "Let's go home." And so, John Wick left the Continental Hotel with his dog. 38. Where Life Lies. Returning home in the pouring rain, John Wick gazed at the ruins that used to be his house. Pain was evident on his face. Amid the debris, he found a photo frame with a picture of him and his wife. He tried to wipe off the soot, hoping to reveal the original photo, but his efforts were in vain. Disappointed, John Wick sat amidst the rubble, looking at the ashes under his feet. He spotted the necklace his wife had left behind and immediately reached for it. After sifting through the ashes, he managed to find the relatively intact necklace. Holding it in his hand, he walked to an undamaged couch and sat down, placing the necklace on his chest and reminiscing about his wife. Suddenly, a voice beside him startled John. He turned to face the source of the sound. Emerging from the darkness was Karen, the concierge of the Continental Hotel. He said, "Mr. Wick." Seeing John's gaze, Karen continued, "If you're willing, you can come with me." John didn't speak but nodded, agreeing to go. Karen drove Winston's Rolls-Royce, accompanied by John Wick and his dog, to meet Winston. Sitting in the back seat, John took out a tissue from his pocket. On it was written Doyle Agency, the same tissue Charles Doyle had handed to him at the Continental Hotel. Seeing the words, John knew that Charles was telling him that his opportunity for a fresh start was with his agency. Putting the tissue back in his pocket, he glanced at the scenery outside and quietly waited. Soon, the car arrived at the entrance of a park. The warm sun was just rising, casting its light on the sky. With his dog by his side, John stepped out of the car as Karen approached him. Karen said, "It was a pleasure spending time with you, Mr. Wick." After shaking hands with John, Karen added, "Farewell." He then pointed in the direction of the park, indicating that the person John was waiting for was there. Walking into the park and crossing a bridge, John spotted Winston sitting in the center of a square and approached him. Seeing John approach, Winston greeted, "John." John cut straight to the point, "Winston, what punishment will I receive?" Winston sat on the steps, his expression serious as he spoke, the bounty on you placed by the high table has doubled through the Kimura. You're now globally hunted. Hearing the name Kimura, John asked in confusion, the high table. Winston nodded, yes. John continued, and what about the Continental Hotel? Winston lifted his head, looking directly at John with a hint of anger in his tone. You killed on the hotel premises, John. I must excommunicate you, I have no other choice. From now on, all services and assistance from the Continental Hotel will be cut off for you. Winston stood up, coming in front of John, and said, I'm sorry, but you're worth nothing now. John's voice was somewhat hoarse, if I've broken the rules, why am I still alive? Hearing John's question, Winston's expression turned solemn, because I demanded it. He then nodded to a man in a black trench coat standing nearby. In the next moment, the man in the trench coat pulled out his phone and said, now. The park, once bustling with people, suddenly froze, as if someone had pressed the pause button. Everyone stopped moving. John Wick looked around, understanding that Winston was serious. Once he confirmed John's comprehension, Winston nodded again. In the next second, everyone in the park resumed their movements. Winston glanced at his wristwatch, saying to John, you have 1 hour. I can't extend it too long. Perhaps in the future, you'll need this. Winston produced a blood oath marker, the very one John Wick had possessed, the one he had earned by aiding another. However, when he chose retirement, he surrendered it to Winston. Now, Winston returned John Wick's blood oath marker, the same one he once held. Accepting the marker, John Wick said, Winston, tell them, tell everyone. No matter the future, no matter the circumstances, when assassins come for me, I will show no mercy, I will not hold back. Winston looked at John's earnest expression and smiled, of course you will. As John turned to leave, Winston remembered what he and Charles had discussed at the Continental Hotel. He spoke again, if there's anyone willing to help you now, the most likely candidate is Charles Doyle. After all, he still holds your blood oath marker, unused. He probably won't let you die easily until he uses it. Of course, it's just a possibility. John halted his steps and said, thank you, Winston. With that, John Wick left the park without looking back. Watching John's departure, Winston picked up his phone and dialed a number, open an account, 11111. In 1 hour, John Wick, excommunicado. On the other side, Charles Doyle Agency. At this moment, Charles was briefing the team, Ginny, prepare the healing bath. We'll need it when John Wick arrives. Surprised at the news of John Wick's visit, Ginny exclaimed, Boss, John violated the rules at the Continental Hotel. How is he even able to come here alive? Clearly, Ginny didn't believe that John, who had broken one of the Continental Hotel's 2 cardinal rules, could still be alive. Charles smiled and then said, trust me, Ginny. John won't die. And I won't let him die. Playfully, Ginny remarked, Boss, that's a $7 million price tag. As Ginny finished speaking, everyone's phones received a notification. John Wick had been excommunicated from the Continental Hotel, his membership revoked. His bounty had also doubled to $14 million. An hour after receiving the message, anyone could hunt John Wick worldwide. Seeing the notification, Ginny whispered, it's $14 million now. His bounty is even higher. He's undoubtedly the undisputed top of the hit list. Boss, do you really think he has a chance of survival coming here? Every hitman in the city must be eager to claim their share of the reward. Besides, would he really dare to come? Charles grinned and said, go prepare, Ginny. Trust my judgment. After all, I've never been wrong. Then, addressing Rika and the others, Charles continued, prepare for combat as soon as John arrives. If any other assassins target the agency, eliminate them on sight. Yes, Lord Charles. X3. 39, 50% confidence. After assigning tasks to the team, Charles gazed at the sky outside, sighing, the weather is about to change. Then, Charles Doyle opened the system interface and completed today's check-in. Ding! Check-in successful, gained 200 reputation points. Would you like to upgrade to VIP 4 and receive double rewards? After clicking the X, Charles exited the system interface and began contemplating how to maximize his gains during the upcoming operation to rescue John Wick. On the other side, the previously sunny sky suddenly became overcast, as if a storm was approaching. Just as John Wick left the park, he appeared on a bustling street, supporting his injured body and accompanied by his loyal dog. He noticed many assassins greedily staring at him. Glancing at his watch, John noted that the excommunication would take effect at 6 p.m., giving him an hour left. Thinking about the note in his pocket and Winston's advice, John Wick knew where he should head next. However, exercising caution, he decided to make a detour to the New York Highway Library to retrieve his hidden gold coins and another item that could aid his escape. Sloan Pass. He couldn't solely rely on the Charles Doyle agency as his last resort. After all, the $14 million bounty was a significant sum. Suddenly, rain started pouring from the sky. John Wick hailed a taxi on the street and said, "Go to the New York Highway Library." The driver turned around and said, "No problem." The car sped up, but before it could go far, traffic congestion caused by the heavy rain brought the vehicle to a halt. Listening to the honking horns of numerous cars ahead, John Wick felt urgency. He knew his safety window was closing rapidly, and once the time was up, anyone could potentially be his enemy. Rolling up his sleeves, John checked the time and took out a Continental Hotel-issued gold coin from his pocket. He handed it to the driver and said, "Change of plans." Hearing his voice, the driver turned around and looked at the gold coin in John Wick's hand before taking it. "Go to the Continental Hotel. Can you hand it to the front desk?" As John Wick spoke, he glanced at his loyal dog sitting beside him. The driver looked at John and nodded, "Sure, Mr. Wick." Evidently, this taxi driver was familiar with the renowned Night Devil. John Wick gently petted his dog a few times and instructed, "Good boy, good boy." Then, he opened the car door, exited the taxi, and started running towards the direction of the library. At this moment, countless eyes on the street were fixated on John Wick. However, knowing they had to wait another hour before they could act, everyone settled down again. After all, they had to abide by the Continental Hotel's rules until that time arrived. Soon, braving the rain, John Wick arrived at the New York Highway Library. Sprinting to the library's service desk, John Wick immediately spoke to the staff member. The author of Russian folktales is Alexander Afanasyev, 1864. As the librarian looked up the book's location, John Wick checked the time again, confirming that there was still time left. The librarian handed John Wick a note with the book's location and said, "On the second floor." "Thank you." Taking the note, John Wick hurriedly made his way to the second floor. Meanwhile, Challen drove Winston back to the Continental Hotel. Upon entering the hotel, Challen expressed, "I really hope Mr. Wick can escape safely." Winston adjusted his collar and replied as he walked, "Challen, he deliberately broke the rules and killed someone in the hotel." Walking alongside Winston, Challen asked, "Do you think he can escape?" Winston turned to look at Challen and said, "He's now worth a $14 million bounty. Every assassin in the city wants a piece of it. I believe there's a 50% chance he'll escape, provided he finds Charles Doyle and gets his help." Challen questioned, 50%? In Challen's understanding, the Charles Doyle who had recently demonstrated his dominance outside the Continental Hotel was someone no assassin dared to provoke. If he decided to intervene, John Wick's chances of escaping should be certain. Winston chuckled, "A 50% chance. Either Charles kills John to claim the bounty, or he helps John escape. After all, the current John Wick has become worthless. He has to choose between the promise of the blood oath marker and $14 million. It depends on Charles Doyle's own decision." After saying this, Winston continued walking upstairs. Watching Winston leave, Challen stood still in place, puzzled. John Wick quickly arrived at the location of the books on the second floor, holding the note. Taking out the book, he tore off a sticker inside, revealing a photo of his deceased wife, few gold coins, a pass, and other items. He placed the photo on the shelf, then took out the gold coins and put them in his pocket. He also put the pass and other items in his pocket. Finally, John Wick picked up the photo of his deceased wife, gazed at it deeply, and kissed it before sealing it back in the book. At this moment, a voice sounded in his ear, "Consider why God created you." Accompanied by footsteps, the voice continued, "Not to live like a beast, but to pursue virtue and knowledge." A giant over 2 meters tall appeared, holding a book. He said to John Wick, "Dante." He showed the cover of the book to John Wick, indicating that the words inside were from the book, and then placed it on the shelf. John Wick also returned the book he held to the shelf. Looking at John Wick, the giant named Ernest spoke, "You seem a bit weak, John. John Wick gazed at the giant and said, "Ernest, the time hasn't come yet." Ernest didn't hold back, "It's almost time. Who knows when you'll die?" John Wick's expression grew serious as he asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Ernest tilted his head, his eyes revealing greed. 14 million. It's a huge sum. No, first, you need to have a life to spend. Without hesitation, Ernest pulled out a short sword from his waist and lunged at John Wick. John Wick quickly picked up a book from the shelf and used it to defend himself. The two clashed instantly. 40, Shoot at Me, Bonus Chapter. Looking at the heavy rain outside the window, Charles sat in the lobby of the office, silently pondering, you had long distanced yourself from the Rosram people. Would you still seek refuge with them for survival? Or will you come straight here? Glancing at the clock hanging on the wall, Charles murmured to himself, John, you don't have much time left. In the library, John Wick had just finished dealing with Ernest using a book. Staring at his fallen enemy, John picked up the book and placed it back on the shelf. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. Wiping his hand across it, he realized it was stained with blood. It was from the dagger wound inflicted by Ernest during their struggle just now. Damn it! John Wick cursed under his breath and quickly rushed out of the library, clutching his injured shoulder. He was headed outside, considering the distance to Charles's office. John decided to take advantage of the remaining time to patch up his wound. Otherwise, he doubted he would make it to Charles's location alive. There were still 10 minutes left until John Wick's removal from the Continental Hotel would take effect. Meanwhile, in the underground realm of the Bowery district, a criminal kingpin similar to the leader of a beggars' gang, known as B, spoke to his subordinate, Ella, spread the word. The Bowery district will respect the decision to remove him. We won't provide any form of help or service to John Wick. At this moment, John Wick had managed to reach the residence of the black market doctor in Chinatown. He knocked loudly on the door and called out, Doctor, Doctor, it's Wick. The hatch on the door opened, and the doctor peered through, looking at the person outside. He said, Mr. Wick, no, you shouldn't have come here. Time is running out. John Wick urgently pleaded, I know. Doctor, I'm begging you, there's still time. The doctor gazed at John outside the door and still refused, no, I can't do this. Seeing the doctor's refusal, John pulled out a Continental Hotel coin from his pocket, held it in front of the doctor, and said, I have 5 minutes left. Please, I'm begging you. The doctor took the coin from John's hand through the small window on the door, then opened the door and said, Come in quickly. After John Wick entered, the doctor peeked his head outside to check the corridor, ensuring no one was following, and then hurriedly closed the door. Leading John Wick to his workstation, the doctor immediately said, Quick, have a seat. John Wick didn't hesitate, he took off his suit jacket, revealing his injured area. The doctor saw the wound on John Wick's shoulder and said, Let me take a look. As he spoke, he picked up a hemostatic gauze and began to clean the wound. While cleaning, he said, Stab wound, it's deep, it cut an artery. It needs stitching. Without hesitation, he started stitching up the wound. Time flowed by, minute by minute. John sat on the chair, watching the clock in the doctor's room. He then said, Doctor. The doctor continued stitching without stopping and replied, Almost done, just halfway to finish stitching. Doctor, there are only 5 seconds left. John began to count down for the doctor, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When the clock's hands pointed to 6, the bell rang. The doctor looked at John with regret and said, I'm sorry, Mr. Wick, I can't continue to help you. John understood, I understand, it's the rules. The doctor muttered, Rules. At this point, John's removal from the Continental Hotel had taken full effect. He was no longer allowed to receive any services from any organization or individual loyal to the authority of the High Table. John Wick took the scissors from the doctor's hand and faced the mirror, continuing the rest of the stitching himself. Continental Hotel, Information Processing Center. At this moment, a message was sent to all registered members of the hotel's assassins. Target, John Wick. Bounty, $14 million. Distribution, Global Assassins. Status, Public. Last known location, New York, Chinatown. Update, bounty officially in effect. Meanwhile, Winston was playing a word puzzle game at the Continental Hotel. Seeing the message on his phone, he muttered to himself, It's begun. At the hotel's front desk, Karen noticed numerous assassins in the administrative hall corridor. Simultaneously, they all looked at their phones upon receiving the message. In Charles's office, he also received the bounty message from the Continental Hotel. After glancing at the message, Charles threw the phone onto the table, picked up a bottle of bourbon whiskey, took a sip, and then silently waited for John Wick to arrive. Meanwhile, John, who was still at the doctor's place, had finished stitching up his wound himself. He started searching the doctor's medicine cabinet for painkillers. After rummaging around for a while, he couldn't find what he needed. Seeing John still searching, out of respect for Mr. Wick, the doctor spoke up, "Top shelf, on the right." "Yes, take 4. It'll help you stay alert and alleviate the pain." John Wick looked at the Chinese doctor in surprise, then immediately took out the medication and started taking it. At this point, the doctor walked to the cabinet, opened a drawer, and took out a handgun, saying, "Mr. Wick, they won't believe I stopped treating you on time." John looked at the doctor and said, "But you did stop." Holding the gun, the doctor continued, "They'll find out." John turned around, adjusted his clothing, and asked, "Find out what?" "That I told you where the medicine was." Hearing the doctor's words, John Wick hesitated for a moment, then turned back. At this point, the doctor walked up to John Wick, handed him the gun, and then sat down on a chair, picking up a hemostatic gauze to be prepared for first aid. Taking the gun from the doctor, John walked to the opposite side, facing the doctor, and asked, "Where should I shoot?" The doctor lifted the hem of his shirt, revealing his lower rib area, pointing with one hand, "Here, just below the floating ribs. Don't hit me." Before the doctor could finish his sentence, John Wick raised his hand and fired a shot, hitting the target accurately. "Ah!" The doctor cried out in pain and slumped in the chair. As John was about to put down the gun and leave, the doctor shouted, "Wait! Perhaps one shot isn't enough." Then, the doctor unbuttoned his collar, exposing his neck and shoulder, and continued, "Please don't shoot me there." Before he could finish his sentence, the gunshot rang out again. "Ah! Ah!" The doctor groaned in pain once more. John approached, picked up his own suit jacket, and turned to leave. At this point, the doctor watched John Wick's retreating figure and said, "Good luck, Mr. Wick." John Wick paused, turned back to face the doctor clutching his wound, and said, "Thank you, doctor." After speaking, John didn't linger and headed straight outside. 41. Loyalty. The phone still on the table rang again, and Charles picked it up to see that John Wick's bounty had been increased to $15 million. A substantial amount of money indeed. "Where are you going, John Wick?" On the other side, John Wick had already made his way from the street to the stables. He eliminated all the incoming assassins there, mounted a horse, and rode out. As he reached the highway, 2 motorcycle-riding assassins chased after him. Beneath an elevated bridge, John Wick urged his horse forward. One of the motorcycle riders caught up and tried to pull him off the horse by reaching out a hand, but his attempts were unsuccessful. Seizing an opportunity, John slapped the rider's helmet, causing the rider to lean forward, revealing a pistol holstered at his lower back. In a swift motion, John Wick bent down on the horse and pulled the pistol from the rider's waist, firing 3 shots at his neck. Bang! 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 The motorcycle rider died instantly, and the uncontrolled motorcycle collided with a nearby truck. Seeing another motorcycle assassin approaching from behind, John Wick took advantage of his pursuit. He leaned to the side of the horse, concealing his body beside the horse, and extended a hand to fire several shots at the oncoming motorcycle. In an instant, the motorcycle rider lost control and crashed into a parked car ahead. After dealing with both motorcycle assassins, John Wick glanced behind to ensure no one was following him. Satisfied that he wasn't being pursued at the moment, he spurred his horse and rode towards the Charles Agency on Forest Hills Avenue in the Queensboro. Charles Agency. In the lobby, Charles and his 5 associates were all waiting. Jenny looked at Charles and asked, "Boss, are you sure you didn't guess wrong? Can John make it here in time considering the circumstances?" Charles wasn't entirely certain, but thinking about John's determination, he replied, "As long as he's not dead, he will come." Just as Charles finished speaking, a knocking sound echoed from the entrance of the agency. Erica stood up and went to open the door. "Mr. John Wick, please come in." Seeing the door of the agency open, John Wick looked at Erica Umino and instead of immediately entering, he asked, I'm looking for Charles Doyle. Irika looked at John standing outside the door and said, Lord Charles is in the lobby, waiting for you. Upon hearing that Charles was inside, John Wick followed Irika into the agency. Meanwhile, on the street across from the agency, an assassin watched John enter Charles's agency and then, with a regretful expression, left the area. John Wick followed alongside Irika and crossed the lobby to stand in front of Charles. Charles looked at the disheveled John Wick, his white shirt stained with blood and soaked by rainwater, and asked, John, why are you here? Although Charles intended to help John, he couldn't initiate the conversation himself. After all, what was at stake wasn't a business deal, it was a matter of favors. While the outcome might be the same, the owed debt would differ. John Wick knelt down on one knee and with a pleading tone, he said, Lord Charles, I request your protection. Charles knew that assisting John would inevitably offend the High Table, but since he was willing to meet him, it meant there was a possibility of help. Charles opened the conversation, John, you've been excommunicated by the Continental Hotel and a public bounty of $15 million is on your head. I won't just offend the High Table by meeting you, even more so by providing you protection. However, since I am willing to meet you, it means there's a chance I might help you. Then, John Wick, what do I gain after I rescue you? While speaking, Charles Doyle took out John Wick's blood oath marker from his pocket and held it in his hand. Evidently, Charles's message was clear. John's blood oath marker was already in his possession. If John wanted his help, the price wouldn't be insignificant. John Wick looked around at the individuals in the lobby: Ginny, Irika, Uchiha Suzuki, Rock Lee, and others. He seemed to come to a decision, then turned his gaze back to Charles and said slowly, I am willing to offer my loyalty, just like them, to become your associate. Observing John's determination, Charles knew he was cornered. Charles asked, John, why do you want to live? John hadn't anticipated Charles asking such a question. After a brief pause, he answered, for my beloved. I want to live on, to remember her. Charles gazed deeply at John Wick and continued, you left the world of assassins 5 years ago for your beloved. And now, because of her, you've returned to this world. John, are you ready for this return? Kneeling before Charles, John Wick pledged, Lord Charles, I am willing. For Helen, I once laid down my weapons and returned to a peaceful life. Today, for Helen, I am willing to take up arms again and keep her alive in my memories. Hearing John Wick's words, Charles recalled a phrase from a past life about how to define a person's death. First death, the death of the flesh. Second death, the death of social ties. Third death, the death of the last traces of memories. Evidently, John Wick wanted to keep Helen alive forever in his memories. John Wick, I accept your loyalty. Hearing Charles's agreement, John's tense heart finally relaxed. But Charles continued, you must know that protecting you means going against the High Table. After all, they want you dead. And if you truly want safety, you must be reinstated by the Continental Hotel and have the bounty removed. To achieve all of this, you'll need the Elder of the High Table, the one controlling one of the 13 seats. At this point, Charles didn't speak further. He simply gazed at John. John Wick's mind raced, and he tentatively asked, should I go to Casablanca to find the High Table's Elder to lift my excommunication? Charles raised his index finger and shook it, then smiled, no, not to find the Elder, but to become the Elder. Become one of the 13 seats of the High Table. John Wick was profoundly shocked. He never anticipated that Charles's goal was the High Table itself, not just to become a member but to become a controller of the High Table. Looking at the astonished John Wick, Charles smiled and said, Irika, take John Wick to the recovery room. He can't stay like this. 42, aiming for the High Table. After Irika had taken John to the recovery room, Charles issued instructions, Suzuki, go outside and check if there are any reckless individuals following us. If there are relentless assassins coming, show no mercy and eliminate them. Yes, Lord Charles, Suzuki replied. He activated his Sharingan and walked towards the exit. Now, in the room, there were only Rock Lee, Ginny, and Charles Doyle. Ginny looked at the man in front of her, hesitating for a moment before asking, Boss, do you really want to become an Elder of the High Table? It sounded insane. Even Ginny, who came from the Assassin Brotherhood, found this idea too wild. Not because Charles Doyle lacked the strength but because they had too few people. Including the newly recruited John Wick, they were only 6 in total. Staring at Ginny's shocked expression, Charles chuckled, nothing stays the same. With our strength, becoming one of the 13 seats of the High Table is achievable. It just so happens that we don't know the location of the High Table's headquarters or the specifics of their elders. But now, we have someone who can lead us there. Ginny, still looking astonished, hurriedly responded, Boss, I'm not questioning your abilities. It's just that we don't have enough manpower. I don't know the exact structure of the High Table's upper echelon, but managing 80% of global assassins in the major city continental hotels requires more personnel than we currently have. But we're just a few people. Ginny didn't finish her sentence, but the implication was clear, their team was understaffed, and they couldn't support the extent of control that came with replacing a seat. Hearing Ginny's words, Charles Doyle smiled, No, Ginny, first, you need to understand that we don't have just these 6 people. Over the years, I've accumulated connections. If I'm willing, with a single command, many assassins will be willing to serve me. Even this John Wick situation presents an opportunity for us to take over a faction. Charles continued, Moreover, I don't need to personally manage these places. I just need a few adjudicators for regular patrols. Hearing the term adjudicator, Ginny immediately thought of John Wick. Given his skills, he would likely excel as Charles's adjudicator, efficiently handling missions. However, Ginny still shook her head and said, Boss, John Wick alone might not be enough. Are you planning to send Irika and the others as well? In fact, I have some candidates to recommend. Upon hearing that Ginny had candidates in mind, Charles was curious. He asked, Who are they? Cross and Wesley. When these 2 names were mentioned, Charles was momentarily stunned. Then, he expressed his surprise, Has Cross trained his son? Not yet, but it's almost there. Cross mentioned that Wesley's talent is exceptional, even surpassing his own. If, boss, you need manpower, you can talk to them. Cross will probably be willing. Charles knew that Wesley had even greater potential than Cross. But he was curious, didn't he want his son to lead a peaceful and ordinary life? Ginny replied, He did, but it seems like Wesley has his own ideas. Ginny smiled and explained, After going through what he did, Wesley can't return to a normal life anymore. Besides, Cross wants his son to have some self-defense skills. You never know when they might need to save themselves from another unusual situation. Hearing this, Charles guessed that Cross might have encountered something significant afterward, which made him realize the importance of his son's abilities. However, he wasn't entirely sure and suggested, Let's talk to them when we have time. If they're willing, becoming adjudicators should be well within their capabilities. Ginny nodded and looked at Charles, a man with ambition that fascinated her. What Ginny didn't know was that Charles's goal in taking over the High Table wasn't about power or ruling over global assassins. It was simply to integrate the New York Continental Hotel's mission system into his own gathering place for missions. Only then would his ninja operatives have a constant flow of missions to accept. The current gathering place for missions allowed a maximum of 9 missions per day, and there were days when Charles's agency had no missions at all. After all, their reputation and competitiveness were nowhere near that of the Continental Hotel. At this moment, the agency's door swung open, and Suzuki entered. Ignoring Ginny's question about potential attackers outside, Suzuki reported to Charles, Lord Charles, I've taken care of a few surveilling assassins outside. As for the FBI agents Irika-sensei mentioned, they withdrew 2 days ago and haven't returned. Hearing the mention of the FBI, Ginny was surprised. She didn't understand why the FBI would come knocking on their door. They weren't the type to attract attention unless they did something unreasonable in public. Interactions between their kind usually went unnoticed. Seeing Ginny's confusion, Charles briefly explained the FBI's visit and didn't delve into their true identities, only describing the situation in broad strokes. Hearing that it was the same FBI that had investigated Wesley earlier and that they were now interested in Rock Lee, Ginny didn't press further. As for Suzuki taking care of the surveilling assassins, Charles didn't pay much attention to it. What puzzled him more was the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D, still under its old name, had withdrawn its personnel. This left Charles somewhat baffled. Nick Fury, with his personality, wouldn't let go of something he wants to control. Was it possible that he no longer saw them as valuable? Charles considered the fact that they hadn't been noticed yet. He thought about how Nick Fury, with the cooperation of the Skrulls and the backing of Captain Marvel, might not consider a few assassins a significant concern. However, Nick Fury was unaware that the longer he delayed getting involved with Charles and his group, the more their resources and power grew. It was merely a fortunate misunderstanding that led Nick Fury to abandon his pursuit of Charles and his team. When he would finally realize their true strength, it would be too late. 43. Adjudicators of the High Table. The Charles Agency had a peaceful night. Morning came. Check-in. Ding. Check-in successful, rewarded with 200 reputation points. Seeing another 200 reputation points added to his account, Charles nodded in satisfaction. He now had 8,296 reputation points, not far from the 10,000 mark. He left his room and took a bottle of bourbon with him as he headed to the recovery room. Upon arriving at the recovery room, Charles saw John Wick submerged in one of the newly constructed cement bathtubs on the far left. His entire body was wrapped in wax, with only his face exposed. Hearing footsteps, John Wick immediately became alert and woke up. However, due to the wax covering his face, he couldn't speak and could only make hum sounds for a while. Seeing John awake, Charles walked over and asked, "John, how are you feeling?" Hearing Charles's voice, John stopped struggling with the wax covering his face. "I feel much better, just a bit thirsty." With John speaking, the wax on his face started to crack, and some even fell into his mouth. Charles cleared away the wax from John's face and said, "Here, have some water." He set aside the bottle of bourbon he brought and poured a small glass of water for John. As the water went down his throat, John felt much better. He thanked Charles, saying, "Thanks, this is my favorite bourbon." "What is this wax bath for?" John asked. Charles placed John's glass aside and explained, "This wax bath stimulates white blood cells and accelerates the healing process. Here, even bruises, cuts, and fractures can heal within hours." Hearing about the incredible function, John Wick was astonished. He stammered, This is too powerful. With this, there's no need to fear ordinary injuries anymore. Especially the rapid healing of cuts and fractures within a few hours, this effect was truly incredible. Even if an assassin suffered a serious injury, they could recover the next day and continue fighting. John was amazed that Charles possessed such a remarkable resource. Even Winston, who ran the Continental Hotel, or the higher UPS in the High Table, didn't have anything comparable. Charles, however, shook his head and said, "Although this is good, it can only treat some external injuries. If you're shot in a vital area, there's no way to save you." Hearing that some life-threatening injuries couldn't be treated, John Wick didn't feel disappointed. For him, the wax bath/healing bath was already an incredibly valuable asset. With this resource, John Wick had even more confidence in helping Charles become one of the 13 seats of the High Table. Just the wax bath alone could bring Charles substantial profits and more manpower. "Charles, this is already perfect. Its capabilities are too powerful." Charles smiled but didn't dwell on the topic. Instead, he said, "All right, I'll leave now. When the wax bath melts, you can get out. I'll be waiting for you in the training room." Continental Hotel. A black Mercedes stopped at the hotel's entrance. A tall woman with a shaved head wearing a black coat, black boots and even black nail polish stepped out of the car. She carried a black briefcase and looked quite imposing. She walked towards the Continental Hotel, exuding a confident and cold aura all the way. Upon reaching the hotel's front desk, she was met with Karen, who greeted her, "Welcome to the Continental Hotel. Is there anything you need?" She took out a gold coin representing her adjudicator status and slowly pushed it toward Karen with 2 fingers, remaining silent and maintaining her unwavering gaze. Karen picked up the coin, examined it carefully, and then placed it on the front desk. He picked up the hotel phone and dialed an internal number. When the call was answered, he said, "Sir, there's an adjudicator who would like to see you." "Very well, sir." Karen hung up the phone and respectfully said to the adjudicator, "The manager is in the lounge." The adjudicator gave Karen another glance, retrieved the coin representing her status, and proceeded to the lounge without uttering a word. At that moment, Winston arrived in the lounge and saw the female adjudicator standing there. He said, "I assume you're here to discuss John Wick. If that's the case, we can get straight to the point. When I asked him to leave, he refused. That's the whole story." The female adjudicator walked up to Winston and stated directly, "Mr. Wick violated the rules." Winston nodded and replied, "Yes. In fact, a life was taken within these walls of the Continental Hotel." "Is that so?" Winston replied somberly, "Yes. The body got even colder staying within these walls. The female adjudicator stared at Winston with a calm expression and said, "I'd like to see it." Winston nodded and led her to the location where Santino D'Antonio's body was stored. They arrived at the crematorium, and on the gurney lay the body of Santino D'Antonio. The female adjudicator gazed at the body and told Winston, "Santino D'Antonio, the newly appointed member of the High Table, was killed by Mr. Wick when he sought sanctuary at the Continental Hotel." She then leaned down to examine the fatal wound on Santino D'Antonio's forehead and said, "It appears to be caused by a .45 ACP caliber automatic pistol round." After confirming the type of firearm used, the adjudicator stood up and turned her gaze to Winston. Meeting her eyes, Winston began to explain, "I cannot control Mr. Wick's actions." The adjudicator countered, "Yet he lives because of your choice, doesn't he?" Winston admitted, "Yes." Seeing Winston's admission, the adjudicator continued, "You and Mr. Wick have been old acquaintances for many years, and it's not an exaggeration to say that you are friends, is it? He killed Santino D'Antonio in front of you, and you chose to stand by and let him go, rather than stopping him or killing him." Winston, hearing the adjudicator's words, immediately sensed trouble and said, "I excommunicated him from the Continental Hotel." The adjudicator did not relent and continued, "But you still gave him an hour to escape." 44. Preparations and schemes. Winston's voice no longer held the same confidence it had at the beginning, but he continued, "He violated the rules in my hotel." The adjudicator maintained a stern expression and said, "That's precisely the problem, it's your hotel. What about your loyalty?" Winston stared at the relentless adjudicator and responded, "I've served for over 40 years. The adjudicator interrupted with a stern face, "Under the High Table, serving the High Table comes before everything else. I know you're loyal, but this matter cannot be ignored. I've made myself clear, I'm here to adjudicate you. You have 1 week to settle your affairs." Hearing this, Winston was taken aback and asked, "What did you say?" The adjudicator continued, "At the same time, if you need assistance with the transition, you can find me in room 217. Winston looked at the adjudicator and said, "I wish you a pleasant stay at the Continental Hotel." Winston's words were not a welcome, they were a reminder to the adjudicator that he was still the owner of the Continental Hotel. The adjudicator gave Winston a deep look, said nothing more, and turned to leave. In the training room, Charles Doyle was refining his chakra. Since awakening the system 3 years ago, he had been working on improving his physical fitness and refining chakra. Although he had the system, which could provide him with more chakra and character abilities, and could allow him to use these skills smoothly, Charles Doyle had started using chakra quite late. Unlike in the world of Naruto, where children started learning about chakra at the age of 5 or 6. More importantly, Charles could not jump onto the roof with a single leap like the kids in the Naruto world, nor could he move at the same speed. The difference in the number of body cells clearly indicated that Charles Doyle's physical qualities were on only par with an ordinary person in the Marvel world. Chakra was born from the combination of spiritual energy and cellular energy. With fewer cells and lower physical quality, the corresponding chakra would be limited. Charles had worked hard during these 3 years of training and had caught up with low-grade ninja students at the Ninja Academy. This was already a significant achievement. When he first recruited Irika Umino, he became his ninja teacher. Although Charles had some understanding and guesses about ninja techniques, using them in practice was a different story. Climbing trees, walking on water, Charles had trained in these areas. However, mastering ninja techniques was another level of difficulty. Besides the skills he got from the system, like Shadow Clone Jutsu, Transformation Jutsu, and Clone Jutsu, other techniques were quite challenging. As for developing techniques like Raise Nan or Chidori, Charles couldn't even think about it. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but his abilities wouldn't allow it. Imagine trying to teach a low-grade ninja student who wasn't even a full-time ninja how to develop these techniques. Even if you told him the principles, he wouldn't be able to figure them out himself. It wasn't that Charles was dumb, it was just that he had too little time to learn these things. Charles was sitting on a cushion, refining his chakra when he suddenly heard the door to the training room open. He stopped refining his chakra and gestured for John Wick to sit down, saying, "Have a seat." John Wick came over and sat down on the cushion opposite Charles Doyle, silently watching him. "Are all the injuries on your body fully healed?" Charles asked. John touched the area around his neck and shoulder and replied, "They've all healed. Your recovery room is truly amazing." Charles nodded and then said, "To become one of the 13 seats of the High Table, the first thing we need to do is to find the location of the High Table headquarters. Do you have any idea about its specific location? After thinking for a moment, John Wick said, I don't know the exact location of the High Table headquarters, but I do know that it's roughly located in the desert near Casablanca. There's an elder stationed there permanently. Charles smiled and asked, if you were to go there now, would you be able to meet the elder of that branch? John thought for a moment and replied uncertainly, if I were alone, there's a possibility that I could be brought before the elder. But if we go together, the High Table elder may not show up. All right, then you'll go to Casablanca to meet the High Table elder. Your job is to find him and protect yourself. Upon hearing Charles Doyle's words, John Wick was curious and asked, it's a desert over there. How will you find me? Charles smiled and didn't explain the use of ninja dogs. Instead, he simply said, I have a way to locate you. As long as you can enter the High Table headquarters and meet the elder inside, that's all we need. John Wick nodded, understanding what he needed to do. Charles then handed him a kunai with special patterns engraved on it and said, when you leave, find Irika. He will take you through a special passage to Kingpin, and from there, you'll take a boat to Casablanca. Upon hearing the name Kingpin, John was briefly surprised. Kingpin, the ruler of Hell's Kitchen, a criminal organization that wasn't part of the High Table. He hadn't expected Charles to have a connection with them. Taking the kunai with the special patterns engraved on it, John Wick left the training room. On the other side, B, also known as the Trash King, was in his gang's headquarters. Erla approached him and said, there's an adjudicator who wants to see you. The Trash King looked at his subordinates, took a deep breath, and thought to himself, the adjudicator's appearance indicates that something bad is about to happen. With an umbrella in hand, the Trash King made his way to the rooftop where he kept his pigeons and waited for the adjudicator's arrival. Soon, Erla brought the adjudicator up to the rooftop. The Trash King looked at the approaching adjudicator and greeted, welcome to my mission control center, my operations hub, and the super information flight route. I control the slightest movements in the streets and the ways of the world from here. The adjudicator looked around in surprise and asked, with pigeons? The Trash King also glanced at the pigeons around them and then explained, that's right. To you, they might be winged rats, but to me, they're the internet. The Trash King spoke confidently, no IP addresses, no digital traces, untraceable, uninvadable, and unsearchable. 45. Kingpin's intentions. The adjudicator sneered, will it infect you with a disease? Trash King's confidence disappeared in an instant as he looked at the adjudicator and said, I wouldn't recommend eating it. After sizing each other up, Trash King asked, what brings you here? The haughty adjudicator tilted her head slightly and said, I want to see the place where it didn't happen. Trash King stared at the adjudicator and asked, the place where what didn't happen? The adjudicator spoke in a measured tone, the place where you didn't kill John Wick. Trash King lowered his head, his voice solemn, I always thought I could decide whether to execute a bounty contract or not. I have no grievances with John Wick. Hearing Trash King's explanation, the adjudicator handed her umbrella to her assistant, Illyra, and took out a pistol from her bag. She pointed it at Trash King and said, more precisely, this gold Browning 1911 pistol. After showing Trash King the weapon used by John Wick for his killings, the adjudicator put the gun back in her bag and walked up to Trash King. She said, you gave John Wick 7 bullets when you knew he was going to fight the High Table. The High Table is giving you 7 days. Upon hearing the adjudicator's words, Trash King asked, 7 days for what? The adjudicator remained expressionless and said, to settle your affairs and find a new home for your birds. In 7 days, you must step down from your throne. Hearing the adjudicator's words, Trash King couldn't hold back and burst into laughter. Ah, ha ha ha. Then, Trash King's laughter grew louder, and he threw his umbrella on the ground. He continued, my dear, do you know what the Casablanca district is? Do you know what will happen when I wave my hand? Trash King waved his hand as a vivid metaphor and continued, no, no one can replace me and ascend to the throne. Because I am the throne, baby. I am the Casablanca district. Trash King stared angrily at the adjudicator and said, I am the things you disdainfully walk past on the streets at night. The Casablanca district belongs to me and me alone. The adjudicator remained cold and emotionless as she said, don't think you are exempt from the rules. No one is above the rules. You have 7 days. After delivering this final statement, the adjudicator turned and left the rooftop. She had to move on to her next destination. Meanwhile, John Wick had followed Irika to the Hell's Kitchen's docks. Irika was in conversation with a gang member, and he handed over Charles Doyle's token to the man. After receiving the token, the gang member entered a nearby building. In a room at the top of the Feskek Tower, Bullseye walked in and said, "Kingpin, someone brought Charles Doyle's token and wants to use our smuggling route to send a person to Casablanca." Upon hearing the mention of Charles Doyle's token, Kingpin's mind immediately went to the man who had single-handedly slaughtered the top 3 gangs in Hell's Kitchen using cold weapons and emerged unscathed. Kingpin had taken over the secrets and assets of those gangs afterward, but not being able to recruit Charles Doyle had always been his regret. Recalling his thoughts, Kingpin looked at Bullseye with a hint of regret in his heart. He thought, without Charles Doyle, Bullseye is still a valuable asset. Then, Kingpin asked, "Do you know who the person we're sending away is?" Bullseye hesitated for a moment and then replied, "Based on the reports from the dock, it should be John Wick." Kingpin murmured, "John Wick, another legendary hitman. Since someone brought Charles Doyle's token, make the arrangements. Remember to collect the token and bring it to me as a favor. This is a matter of goodwill." Bullseye hesitated for a moment at Kingpin's instructions and asked, $14 million, and we risk offending the high table. Is it worth it? Kingpin chuckled, "I am the king of Hell's Kitchen, and I'm not loyal to the high table. Their rules don't apply to me. As for John Wick's bounty, don't worry about it. It's not easy to obtain, and it would only offend Charles Doyle. It's not necessary." "Understood." Bullseye then exited the room. Watching Bullseye leave, Kingpin turned to look out the window, gazing in the direction of the Continental Hotel. He murmured, "The Continental Hotel, the high table, Charles Doyle. It seems that the underground world of New York is about to change again." Meanwhile, the gang member who had communicated with Irika said, "It's done. Let him go with me." Irika nodded and said, "Thank you." Then, turning to John Wick, he said, "You can follow him. He will take you to your destination. After arriving in Casablanca, John, you can proceed according to your own methods. As for the rest of us, we will enter through regular channels, and we should arrive faster than you. When you meet the elder of the high table, we will also be there. John, take care." Irika patted John Wick on the shoulder and then turned back to the car he came in, heading back to Charles's agency. As John Wick watched Irika depart, he took a deep breath and then followed the gang member who was waiting for him at the docks. At Charles's agency, Charles was reading the latest news in the newspaper when his phone rang. He saw that it was a call from Kingpin. Without hesitation, Charles answered the call. "Good afternoon, Charles." Hearing the voice on the other end, Charles smiled and replied, "Good afternoon, Kingpin. In the face of the high table, I wonder if Mr. Charles needs assistance from Hell's Kitchen." Kingpin offered, extending his goodwill. Charles, however, quickly declined, "This is just a minor issue, Kingpin. The confrontation with the high table will be resolved soon." Despite Charles's refusal, Kingpin didn't seem to mind and continued, "If you ever need it, feel free to come to me. I'm willing to support you." "Thank you." Charles ended the call. Looking at his phone, Charles Doyle muttered, "This old man, is he still holding out hope for me after all this time?" Ever since Kingpin witnessed some of his capabilities, he had harbored great goodwill towards him, hoping to recruit him into his ranks. However, he had never succeeded. Nevertheless, their relationship was still cordial. Sometimes, when Bullseye couldn't handle certain enemies, Kingpin would hire him to deal with them. 46. Cast out. In New York, it had been raining all day, and the heavy rain continued into the night. The adjudicator stepped out of a taxi and arrived at the Hirajima sushi shop. The owner and head chef of the sushi shop, Zero, greeted the incoming customer, saying, "Welcome. Is there anything you need?" The adjudicator sat down, took out a gold coin that represented her identity, and placed it in front of the owner. Zero, upon seeing the gold coin symbolizing the adjudicator's identity, turned to the woman in front of him and said, "I didn't expect the high table to send you so quickly." The adjudicator stared at Zero and said, "I have a task involving someone who broke the rules and went against the high table." Zero paused in his actions and raised his head. "You mean John Wick?" Upon hearing Zero's response, the adjudicator continued, "John Wick and everyone who aided him. Of course, you must have heard his story. In just the past week, John has killed countless people." Zero interjected, all because of a dog and a car. I know, and I'm interested. Very interested. Zero then picked up a piece of fugu, blowfish, meat and said, fugu, lethally toxic. He placed the fugu meat in front of the adjudicator and added, no need for soy sauce. The adjudicator calmly picked up the fugu meat and put it in her mouth. Seeing the other person eat the fugu meat, Zero said solemnly, I have always served the high table, and from now on, I will serve faithfully unto death. He then bowed with his 2 disciples behind him. With this assurance from Zero, the adjudicator collected the gold coin on the table and left the Hirajima sushi shop with Zero and his disciples. Charles's agency. At this moment, Charles Doyle was sitting in the lobby, sipping on a glass of Scotch whiskey. He had received word that the adjudicator of the high table had arrived in New York and would likely come looking for him soon. To flex his muscles in front of the high table and prove his loyalty, Charles Doyle planned to take down the adjudicator before heading to Casablanca. Timing seemed to work out perfectly. As Charles Doyle contemplated his next move, the entrance to the agency was pushed open. The adjudicator, dressed in black, walked in with 3 assassins trailing behind, including Zero and his 2 disciples. Upon seeing the newcomer, Charles Doyle smiled and said, the adjudicator of the high table, you're quite fast. The adjudicator walked over and took a seat on the couch opposite Charles. She looked at the man in front of her and said, Charles Doyle, in your youth, you joined the Continental Hotel and pledged unwavering loyalty to the high table. Yet you helped John Wick and arranged for him to leave New York. What about your loyalty? Charles wore a contemptuous expression on his face as he looked at the woman in front of him. He slowly spoke, I believe I have the strength and the right to decide my own actions. The adjudicator gave Charles Doyle a deep, scrutinizing look, trying to see through his ambitions. Then, in a cold voice, she said, while you may be New York's top assassin and hold the title of a legendary killer, that doesn't mean you stand above the high table. You will atone with blood. Now, extend your helping hand and swear your loyalty. Seeing that the adjudicator was playing this game with him, Charles Doyle's expression changed, and his aura erupted. A palpable murderous intent filled the room, primarily directed at the adjudicator. In the next moment, 3 figures suddenly appeared by Charles Doyle's side, Domino Irika, Uchiha Suzuki, and Rock Lee. As soon as they appeared, they surrounded Zero and his 2 disciples. Under Charles's overwhelming presence, the adjudicator's face turned pale instantly, as if she had seen a sea of corpses and blood, and her body stiffened under the oppressive murderous intent. Even Zero, a seasoned assassin, felt a chilling aura rising from the ground. He thought to himself, is this the power of Charles Doyle, who surpasses even legendary assassins? Just his killing intent alone is terrifying. Watching the adjudicator, who was now unable to speak or move, Charles Doyle sneered, your judgment doesn't work on me. Not only are you powerless, but these 3 guys you brought along are also useless. Throw these 3 annoying people out. Hearing Charles's command, Irika and the others grabbed Zero and his disciples and unceremoniously threw them onto the street. Throughout this ordeal, the 3 of them didn't resist or fight back at all. Zero knew that not fighting back was the only way to survive, retaliating would have meant instant death. Now, looking at the speechless and immobile adjudicator, Charles Doyle retracted his imposing aura and calmly said, you couldn't even move under my killing intent. How can you judge me? As the murderous intent and aura dissipated, the adjudicator's face slowly regained its color. It was as if the congealed blood in her veins had started flowing again. She took a deep breath. The feeling from just moments ago had been terrifying. It was like the Grim Reaper had his hand around her throat, ready to take her life at any moment. After calming down, the adjudicator regained her composure and spoke, I admit, Mr. Charles, that you have sufficient power. But the high table is above all rules. Under the high table, everyone must adhere to its regulations. John Wick has already been excommunicated from the Continental Hotel and a public contract has been issued for his assassination. Anyone or any organization under the dominion of the high table cannot aid John Wick, or they will be in opposition to the high table. Seeing the adjudicator trying to regain control, Charles Doyle chuckled, excommunication? Just re-register. As for the contract, just cancel it. As long as the elder speaks, everything is possible. Hearing Charles Doyle mention the elder, the adjudicator thought he was aiming for a higher position. She stood up and said, Mr. Charles, you should know that nothing will change until new orders are issued. The will of the high table must be executed, and I am just the enforcer of that will. The power of the high table is not limited to this alone. Charles remained silent and only made a dismissive gesture. The adjudicator gave Charles Doyle a deep look before turning and leaving the agency. However, what she didn't know was that Charles Doyle didn't intend to pursue a higher path or have the Elder pardon John Wick. Instead, he aimed to become an Elder, one of the 13 seats at the high table. He aimed to become the one in control of the high table. 47. The Bowery King's Dilemma, Bonus Chapter. T/N, instead of Trash King, it should be Bowery King. Due to my unfamiliarity with all the characters in John Wick, I made this mistake. Sorry about that. The adjudicator walked out of Charles's agency. Zero, who had been thrown out, approached the adjudicator with his head down and said, "I'm sorry, I wasn't a match for them." Thinking of Charles Doyle's strength, the adjudicator didn't get angry. She remained calm and said, "It's not your fault. Charles Doyle is just too powerful. We don't need to deal with him now. It seems we need some reinforcements from headquarters." The adjudicator was well aware that when she brought Zero and his group into Charles's agency, there were likely people watching in the shadows, eager to see how she, representing the high table, would fare against the legendary assassin. However, shortly after entering, Zero and his group were thrown out. While Zero couldn't represent the high table's reputation, it was clear that her authority had taken a hit. At the very least, others would know that she had lost in the initial confrontation. In 7 days, she had to perfectly resolve the high table's judgments, especially regarding the Continental Hotel. As for Charles on the other side, she believed he could climb up the upper channels given his capabilities. After all, Charles Doyle's strength was no joke. On the other side, the Bowery King stood in his internet center, listening to Erla's report. He chuckled and said, "She has her moments of defeat as well." Erla's expression remained steady, and she didn't join the Bowery King's laughter. Instead, she said, "King, Charles was able to withstand the adjudicator because he has the strength for it. After all, Charles had already proven himself outside the Continental Hotel. Plus, his subordinates are formidable as well. Even his secretary comes from the Assassin's Brotherhood." After a brief pause, Erla continued, "But we may not be able to resist the adjudicator's power. Furthermore, since she lost face in front of Charles, she might try to regain it by using us to establish her authority." The Bowery King thought for a moment. He knew that he couldn't stop the high table's judgment. Once she used him to establish her dominance, it wouldn't be as simple as relocating or relinquishing his position. He might face death, unless the adjudicator strictly followed the rules. Even then, he would lose everything. Losing Bowery District and his subordinates would be no different from losing his life, as he would ultimately fall into the hands of his former enemies. Finally, the Bowery King hesitated. "Erla, should we ask for Charles Doyle's help?" Erla thought for a moment and said, "We can try, but what can we offer in return? What can we offer?" The Bowery King pondered for a long time without figuring out what kind of price he could pay to obtain Charles Doyle's assistance. He wasn't even sure why Charles Doyle would protect John Wick in the first place. "Erla, tomorrow, try to find out what price we need to pay for Charles Doyle's protection. If Charles Doyle can make the high table stop pursuing John Wick, then maybe he can do the same for us. Even if it means confronting the high table, with Charles Doyle on our side, our chances are better." Erla nodded, indicating her understanding. The Bowery King stood on the rooftop, the cold wind howling around him. He looked at the bird cages around him and thought, "I hope we can safely navigate through this crisis." He had never expected that simply giving John Wick a handgun would lead to such a serious problem. At the Continental Hotel, Winston set aside his newspaper and looked at the information his subordinates had provided. He muttered to himself, "Charles sent John Wick away and humiliated the adjudicator. This seems like a prelude to a war with the high table." Then he thought about Charles Doyle's strength and his formidable subordinates. Winston understood that the high table wasn't a monolithic entity. With Charles's strength, the possibility of negotiations with the adjudicator was not non-existent but rather quite plausible. However, thinking about the situation he was about to face, Winston felt the need to take action. The next day. Check-in. Ding. Check-in successful. Received 5,000 bronze coins. Charles Doyle walked out of his room and entered the agency's lobby, where the entire team had already gathered. Ginny handed him a breakfast of bread and milk and said, "Boss, here's your breakfast." Charles took the breakfast from Ginny's hand, took a sip of milk, and asked, "How's everything going?" Ginny smiled and said, Everything's ready. Our flight to Casablanca is at 10 in the morning. I've also spoken with Carlos, he's willing to work for you and become your adjudicator. But he'll pledge his loyalty after we finish this task and return. Right now, he's training his son. He wanted me to convey his apologies for not being able to join this mission. Hearing Ginny's report, Charles smiled and said, "That's great. Our team is expanding once again. As for this mission, whether Carlos and his team come or not, the result will be the same. Let him focus on training his son. When we return from Casablanca, our next-door neighbor, the landlord, should be back. By then, Ginny, you should expedite the expansion of the agency." Looking at Charles's confident demeanor, Ginny's lips curled into a smile. "I'll take care of it as soon as we return. I've also arranged the sale of the gold and jewelry. We'll handle it directly when we're back. Boss, after breakfast, we need to get ready to head to the airport." Charles nodded and glanced at his team. He then turned to Irika and said, "Irika, how are the three of you prepared for this mission? It won't be easy. Lord Charles, please rest assured. We've already made all the necessary preparations for the mission," Irika replied respectfully. "Leave it to me, and you can trust that the lotus of Konoha will bloom once again." Seeing Rock Lee's fiery spirit, Charles smiled and took a few bites of his bread before saying, "Let's go." As for Shizuke Uchiha, he remained as cool and silent as ever, not uttering a word. Shortly after Charles Doyle and his team left, the adjudicator in her room at the Continental Hotel received a message. She learned of Charles and his team's flight and their destination, Casablanca. Looking at the report from her subordinate, the adjudicator mumbled to herself, "Is he going to meet the elder?" Then, she glanced at her wristwatch and said, 6 days left. On the other side, Erla stood in front of Charles's agency, which now had a locked gate and a sign saying temporarily closed. She knew they were in trouble. Charles Doyle had left, and the entire team had departed. Even the agency was temporarily closed. Their escape route was gone. Erla no longer hesitated and immediately rushed back to Bowery District to report the situation to the king. 48. John Wick's arrival. Casablanca, Morocco. Welcome to the Continental Hotel in Morocco. Is there anything I can assist you with? Charles Doyle took out 5 gold coins from his pocket and placed them on the front desk, saying, "We need 5 rooms." The hotel staff accepted the gold coins and began processing the check-in procedures for Charles and his group. After Charles distributed the room keys to everyone, just as they were about to go upstairs to their rooms, they heard someone calling out, "Charles Doyle." Hearing his name being called, Charles turned around and saw a familiar face. He smiled and said, "Beretta." Beretta walked up to Charles Doyle and extended his hand, saying, "Hello, it's great to see you." Charles shook Beretta's hand and then said to Ginny and the others, "You all can go to your rooms first." He then went with Beretta to the hotel's lounge area and sat on the couch. Beretta looked at Charles and said, "It's been over a year since your last visit to Morocco. And I've heard about your actions in New York." Charles smiled and replied, "Those are just small matters, nothing significant." Hearing Charles Doyle's response, Beretta asked, "You're not here to kill me, are you?" Charles looked serious and replied, "No." Although in his mind, he couldn't help but think, after you deal with your underlings, you might be in danger. Hearing Charles's answer, Beretta visibly breathed a sigh of relief. Then he remembered something and asked, "Are you going to meet the elder?" Charles nodded without denying it. Beretta took out a room key from his pocket and placed it on the table, saying, "This is the best room in my hotel." "Thank you," Charles replied without rejecting his offer. "I wish you a pleasant stay." Then Beretta got up and left. Charles Doyle picked up the room key from the table and also left the hotel lounge. He went to the hotel room that had been prepared earlier and found that everyone was already inside one room. He walked in. Seeing Charles's arrival, Ginny asked, "Boss, what do we do next?" "We wait. We wait for John Wick to arrive, wait for him to seek out the elder who stands above the high table." Then Charles turned to Irika and asked, "Did you bring the blood-stained shirt that John Wick changed out of earlier?" Irika quickly replied, "Lord Charles, I've brought everything with me." Charles nodded in satisfaction and continued, "The high table's headquarters are in the desert near Casablanca. The exact location, apart from themselves, is unknown to others. Even if we meet, they always make sure their target is exhausted and unconscious in the desert before bringing them to the location. Their security measures are very tight. We can't waste time exploring on our own. Let John go find him, and someone will bring him to the elder. That's when we'll attack the high table. Ginny asked in surprise, Boss, how are you so sure that John Wick will be able to meet the elder of the high table? Is this another secret you can't talk about? Charles Doyle smiled and said, Smart. Then he took out the room key that Beretta had given him, claiming it was the best room in the hotel, and said, Ginny, this is the best room in the hotel that Beretta gave us. You're the only lady here, so enjoy the best accommodation for the next few days. If you find it unsatisfactory, you can ask Beretta to renovate it properly instead of giving it away. Ginny didn't refuse and took the room key. She threw a flirtatious look at Charles and said softly, I'll be waiting for you in the room. After saying that, she turned and left the room. Seeing this scene again, Sasuke Uchiha rolled his eyes. Then he left the room as well. Rock Lee, seeing Sasuke leaving, shouted, Wait for me. He immediately got up and ran out of the room. Now the room was left with only Charles Doyle and Irika Umino. Irika glanced at Charles and said awkwardly, Lord Charles, this is my room. Feeling the awkward atmosphere, Charles Doyle took out the room key he had obtained at the front desk and said, I'll go to my own room. Watching Charles leave, Irika wanted to laugh but dared not. He just endured it silently. Back in his original room, Charles Doyle sighed, I've been teased again. Ginny is really audacious. Doesn't she know I can transform into a wolf at any time? By the way, what was the room number on that room key? He seemed to have forgotten to check it. No longer thinking about these things, Charles Doyle entered the system interface and selected the training ground. He wanted to practice his ninjutsu. In the evening, John Wick arrived in Casablanca. He was heading towards the Continental Hotel in Morocco when he was once again surrounded by a group of assassins under a triple bridge tunnel. Seeing 3 assassins brandishing their knives, John Wick decided to strike first. He attacked one of them instantly. John Wick moved left and right, dodging the slashing knives. He took the opportunity to grab one of the assassin's wrists, delivered a punch to his face, and followed up with an elbow strike. 2 more assassins rushed in to help but were swiftly kicked down by John Wick. He then performed a turning back throw, tossing the assassin whose wrist he had grabbed earlier. As the assassin who had just been knocked down got back on his feet, he raised his knife and lunged at John Wick. John Wick, quick on his feet, instantly grabbed the assassin's wrist, and the two engaged in a struggle. Enough! Outside the bridge tunnel, a man's voice interrupted the standoff. He walked out from the darkness, lit a cigarette, and approached them. He came to the 2 men who were in a stalemate and said, I'm afraid this friend is off limits. The assassin looked at the bald man who had spoken and explained, but he's been excommunicated. The bald man stared at the assassin and said, I heard the manager has granted him a pardon. Hearing the word pardon, John Wick looked at the bald man with surprise. The bald man then gestured for John Wick to follow him. John Wick released the assassin and ended the standoff. He also returned the knife he had taken from the assassin. The bald man made a pleased gesture to John Wick and then looked at the 3 assassins before turning to lead John away. Seeing John and the bald man turning away, the assassin who had just spoken felt reluctant. He quickly pulled out his knife, preparing to throw it at John Wick. However, before he could throw it, the bald man swiftly turned around and shot him. Having killed the assassin who was about to attack, the bald man holstered his gun and turned back to John Wick, saying, Welcome to Casablanca, Mr. Wick. Thank you. John said, expressing his gratitude for the assistance earlier. The bald man smiled and then led John away from the scene. 49. Sophia Alley's War. Mr. John Wick, it's been a long time since you graced our city, the bald man said with a smile as they walked. John was about to speak when the bald man interrupted, Ms. Alley's War is waiting for you. Soon, the 2 arrived at the hotel's entrance, pushing open the doors. Inside, they entered a small plaza where a lively gathering was taking place, resembling a banquet. Mr. Wick, welcome to the Continental Hotel in Morocco. I hope this place suits your taste. The bald man escorted John Wick through the crowd towards the hotel's interior. Right this way, Ms. Alley's War doesn't like to wait for anyone. Eventually, the bald man led John into a room and said, Wishing you good luck, Mr. Wick. He emphasized once more, Wishing you good luck. With a smile on his face, the bald man exited the room. Seeing the bald man leaving, the room's lobby was now empty. John Wick walked a few steps further. On a round table, he noticed several photographs. He picked up a small picture frame, and inside was a photo of Sophia Allais' war with her daughter. As John Wick was looking at the photo, 2 Belgian Malinois dogs suddenly appeared in the room. They stared menacingly at him, baring their teeth as if ready to attack. Just then, the sound of a gun being cocked came from the innermost part of the room, and a woman emerged, holding a pistol as she approached John Wick. She simultaneously said, "Do you like dogs, John?" John Wick turned to face the approaching figure, not entirely sure, and said, "Sophia." He then placed the photo frame back on the table and raised both hands, indicating that he posed no threat. As John Wick watched, Sophia showed no mercy. She aimed her pistol directly at his abdomen and fired. Bang! The bullet hit John Wick, and the force and pain made him immediately fall to the ground. Lying on the ground, John looked at Sophia and immediately said, "Sophia, you can't kill your blood marker holder." Sophia aimed her pistol at John Wick while stepping closer, saying, "I didn't kill you, I just shot you." Sophia glanced down at John and realized he wasn't injured, the bullet had simply fallen to the ground. This was due to the bulletproof suit that John Wick had custom-made at the Continental Hotel. John Wick took a deep breath, shook off the suit, and the bullet fell to the ground. The suit had saved him from injury, but being shot at close range was still painful. John Wick looked at Sophia and said, "It's good to see you." Sophia, still pointing her gun at him, gritted her teeth and said, "I should have blown your head off immediately." John Wick replied, "I know." He then slowly sat up on the ground and reached into his suit pocket. Sophia, watching John Wick's movements, cautioned, "Don't do anything." However, what John Wick pulled from his pocket was not a gun but the blood oath marker Sophia had given him. Sophia, still pointing the gun at him, said, "You've been excommunicated, John." "That blood oath has become meaningless," she said. John Wick now held the blood oath marker in his hand. He slowly got up, opened the blood oath marker, and placed it in front of Sophia, saying, "This is your blood. Your marker. When you needed help, I helped you." At this moment, John Wick was repeating the same words he had heard from others to Sophia. Hearing John Wick's words, Sophia sighed and then lowered the gun aimed at him. She looked at him helplessly and said, "Sit." In the next moment, the 2 Belgian Malinois dogs immediately sat down obediently. John Wick glanced at the dogs, still holding the blood oath marker in his hand, not letting it go. Sophia said, "I meant for you to sit down, John." Sophia then turned and walked to a nearby sofa, sitting down slowly. Seeing John Wick sitting, Sophia said, "Do you realize that I'm in charge of this hotel now? I'm no longer providing services, John." John Wick replied, "I'm not asking you to kill anyone. I just need you to take me to him." Sophia asked, "To whom?" John answered, "Your former boss, the overseer of the Continental Hotel in Morocco." Sophia asked with a puzzled look, "You want to kill Beretta?" John Wick hurriedly said, "I won't kill him. I just want to talk to him." Sophia looked at him in confusion and asked, "What can he offer you?" John Wick sighed and seemed to remember something. He said, "Guidance." After hearing John's response, Sophia said, "Listen, when I agreed to take over this hotel, it came with an agreement. The agreement stated that I must abide by the High Table's rules. Even if you don't intend to kill him, he'll kill you. He probably will kill me as well because I brought you here." Sophia looked serious and said, "If I make one mistake, make one enemy, someone might come after my daughter. I know what you did to try to save her. But I can't take that risk, I'm sorry." John Wick lowered his head and said, "Do you want to know where she is?" Sophia stared at John and said seriously, "No, I never want to know. Because I don't trust myself not to go looking for her. A part of me longs to see her, and I have to suppress that part every day. Just to keep her safe." Sophia's voice sounded melancholic at this moment as she continued, "Because sometimes you have to forget what you love. That's why I gave you that blood marker in the first place. That's why I'm sitting here now, unable to break free." John Wick looked at the blood oath marker in his hand and said, "Consequences?" Sophia nodded and said, "Yes, consequences." Looking at Sophia in front of him, John Wick said, "I'm just asking you to give it a try. Whatever the result, you and I will be even." He then placed the blood oath marker on the table and pushed it towards Sophia. 50. The targeted greyhound. Sophia fixed her gaze on John Wick, extending a hand to push the Blood Oath medallion back and said, "No, this is something you owe me afterward." She then stood up and added, "We depart in 10 minutes. On the other side, on a rooftop terrace of the Morocco Continental Hotel. Charles and his group had gathered there, overlooking the second-level terrace below, visible from their vantage point. This was the best room Beretta had provided for them, and the attached terrace was the only one that allowed them to see the second level. Irika approached Charles and said with respect, "Lord Charles, John Wick has already arrived at the hotel." Charles, holding a glass of white horse whiskey, took a sip and replied, "Understood." He then glanced down at the empty terrace below and muttered, "Why do people always want to kill dogs? Do they not realize that dog lovers can be terrifying?" Hearing Charles's words, Ginny walked over and looked down but didn't see anything unusual. She then asked, "Boss, who wants to kill a dog?" Charles pointed to the empty terrace below and said, "Later, someone confident will come here, wanting to do something foolish." Ginny blinked at Charles, his eyes filled with a mix of surprise, disbelief, and even a hint of admiration. Being originally from the Assassin Brotherhood, Ginny had a high tolerance for these kinds of prophetic abilities, and Charles's occasional cryptic remarks only elevated his image in Ginny's mind. On the other side, Sophia had already changed into her combat gear and was holding her weapons as she walked out. Seeing Sophia's attire and weapons, John Wick sat on the couch and said, "We don't need to storm in like before. This time, it's just a conversation." Sophia approached her greyhound and knelt down. Then, she looked at John Wick and said, "Getting involved with you is never just a conversation." She then placed her handgun inside the greyhound's protective vest. Addressing John Wick, she said, "Let's go." Sophia led John Wick through the underground district toward the location where Beretta was. As they passed through the district, they were stopped and subjected to a body search. Just as they had completed the search, Beretta approached them with open arms and said, "Sophia, it's always a pleasure to see you." He then walked up to them and added, "And of course, your dogs, they are magnificent. Can I pet them?" Sophia looked at him and nodded, giving her consent. "Of course, this one is named Doyle." At this point, Doyle, the greyhound, came over to Beretta. Beretta knelt down and praised, "Absolutely fantastic." Then, while stroking the dog's head, Beretta said, "John Wick, I heard you've set foot on our side of the coast." Beretta didn't spend more time with the dog and stood up, saying, "Come, there's certainly much for us to discuss." On the way, Beretta spoke up, "I must admit, I'm quite curious. What brings you to my territory? Tell me, are you here to kill me?" John Wick looked at Beretta and replied, "No." Hearing that John wasn't here to kill him, Beretta nodded in satisfaction. Today, he had met two legendary assassins, and neither of them had come for him. He then led them to the second-floor terrace. Meanwhile, Ginny, who had been keeping her eyes on the second-floor terrace, whispered to herself, "Someone is really here, and there are dogs." She then glanced at Charles, her expression filled with surprise, disbelief, and even a hint of admiration. Upon hearing Ginny say that someone had arrived on the second-floor terrace, Charles said, "Everyone, come over and take a look. We're about to have a show." He then asked, "Irika, can you hear any sounds from below?" Everyone tilted their heads to listen, but aside from the howling wind, they couldn't hear anything. They shook their heads in response to Charles's question. Charles shrugged, indicating that they would be witnessing a silent drama. Back on the second-floor terrace, Beretta asked, "Mr. Wick, do you know the origin of the word assassin?" Without waiting for John Wick to respond, Beretta continued, "There are various opinions on the term assassin. Some say it comes from the Assassin Brotherhood, followers of Hassan. But others believe the word originates from believer, signifying devout and faithful individuals." He then pointed to a coin displayed nearby and said, "See that? It's the first coin ever minted here. Next to it is the first blood marker. Believe me, that coin no longer holds any monetary value. It represents business relationships, the social contracts you agree to. Order and rules." Beretta walked up to John Wick and continued, "You've disrupted the order, and the High Table has decreed your death. Why should I let you leave here alive?" Kneeling down in front of Beretta, John spoke, "I want to make amends for my actions and pay the price. I want to meet the one above the High Table." John's mindset wasn't exactly what Beretta had expected. He didn't actually want Elder's forgiveness, he wanted to become a guide to find the headquarters of the High Table. Upon hearing John's words, Beretta raised an eyebrow. This was the second person today who wanted to meet the elder, and both of them were legendary assassins. Charles had not asked for the elder's address but had instead checked into the hotel peacefully. Looking at John Wick before him, Beretta sensed that the situation might not be as straightforward as he thought. Without responding to John, he turned to Sophia and said, "I really like this dog. Tell me, does it shed a lot?" Not understanding why Beretta was asking this, Sophia replied, "Occasionally." John Wick glanced at Sophia and said in a solemn tone, "After I leave, you can tell the elder that I want to find him. If he wants me dead." Before John could finish his sentence, Beretta interjected, "Then I will ensure your body is exposed to the sunlight." "Understood. You're giving me the option to kill you or spare you for the..."
Thanks for listening.